The ending of a story is never an easy accomplishment. Sure, the entire process of creating a story is challenging, but bringing everything to a satisfying conclusion is a Herculean task in and of itself. Plot lines have to be wrapped up, character arcs have to reach their apex, and above all else, even beyond just trying to satisfy everyone you've brought along with you for the journey, the hardest thing of all is just saying goodbye. To close the book on a chapter of your life. The last chapter of a piece of yourself that, even with the words "the end" attached to it, will never truly feel complete. This is the relationship I often have with endings. No matter how happy, sad, or bittersweet they are, no matter how often I can go back and experience the journey again, there is still that lingering feeling of melancholy that comes from the curse of knowing. Knowing where it all ends, where all these characters I love so much will be. There's a comfort to this kind of finality, but also a lingering sorrow. And I guess, in the end, that's what every great ending aspires to be. Something that leaves you wistful, yet ultimately satisfied. And then you have the rise of Skywalker.
They fly now!
They fly now?
They fly now!
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Rey! Rey, I never told you Rey! Rey!
You are a Palpatine.
Fortunately, no matter what you may think of the finale, Amphibia at least didn't pull a Rise of Skywalker. Season 3 of Amphibia sees Anne and the rest of the planters in a strange yet familiar land, Los Angeles, California. Reuniting with their parents, Mr. and Mrs. Boonchoy agree to house Hop-Pop, Polly, and Sprig as they try to find a way to reopen the portal to Amphibia. While the frogs disguise themselves and navigate the mundane abnormalities of the human world, back in Amphibia, King Andrias decimates the countryside to build a massive army with the intent to invade other worlds. All the while, Sasha struggles to atone for her actions in Utopia, and Marcy is held captive in a rejuvenation tank after being injured. It isn't all fun misadventures for the planters, though, with Andrias sending many robot scouts to try and assassinate Anne, and the FBI catching wind of the new interdimensional visitors. It's going to take all of their might to get back to Amphibia and stop Andrias before he destroys both of their worlds in one fell blow. But even with her new powers thanks to her fractured connection with the Calamity Box, will Anne be ready for the consequences that come with it? Season 3 dropped in October 2021, following a lengthy 4-month hiatus and about 2 months after The Owl House went on its own mid-season hiatus. I mean, geez, all these hiatuses. What other show made for a demographic way younger than me am I supposed to watch? Bluey?
I have to go. I'm a big girl now.
Remember, I'll always be here for you. Because I love you.
This show is beautiful. This third season also marks the final act of the show, which creator Matt Brawley foreshadowed all the way back in August of 2020 during a Reddit AMA. With the anticipation of this grand finale between Anne, the planters, and all the rest of her friends against the tyrannical forces of King Andrias, came a lot of expectations and no small amount of dread. I mean, Season 2 ended on such a dark note, the darkest note any Disney Channel show had ever hit in a long time. Just you wait. With such status quo breaking elements, like Sasha finally realizing her manipulative tendencies destroyed her friendships, the reveal that Marcy intentionally sent her and the other girls to Amphibia, and Anne gaining awesome anime powers thanks to her connection with one of the Calamity Gems, not to mention a child being frickin' stabbed. It was hard not to get excited thinking of all the possibilities that could unfold, especially with the isekai pendulum swinging the other way, and now it's the planters who are out of their element. This is where it's probably beneficial that this video took so long to make. At least that's what I tell myself so I can sleep a little better.
Good morning, Hop-podge.
As there's a noticeable divide among the fanbase as to whether or not Amphibia's final season really delivered on all the promise it seemed to set up in true colors. Whether or not the tone should have been darker, certain character arcs were explored thoroughly enough, whether certain characters should have been given way more of a presence, if they had any at all, and above all else, whether the finale was a poignant through line for the show's themes and relationships, or an utter betrayal of them. Now, I may be a simple YouTuber with no sense of proper time management.
We got work.
I don't really want to do the work today. I don't really want to do the work today. I don't really want to do the work today.
But I'd like to officially throw my hat into the discussion ring several months later when all the hype has died down and most of the fandom has moved on to other things. Hey, it's not my fault getting around to this took so long, okay? I was making what I know my viewers were dying to see. A 2.5-hour video about Leica Studios and their movies. I mean, it got like a fraction of the Amphibia video views.
Always like to keep my audience riveted.
In seriousness, I think any critique of a piece of media, positive or negative, can give you a sense of perspective you might not have had before. And even if you didn't like Amphibia Season 3 or outright hated it, I don't expect this video to change your mind or anything. But I do hope it might give you some perspective on why I liked it, at the very least. Do I have my own issues with it? Sure, and I'm not gonna ignore them just for the sake of trying to keep a positive attitude for this channel. But when I look at the way the overall story played out, from Anne's first meeting of Sprig to the very end of their journey together, I don't really find myself wishing that things could have been different. At least, not to a major extent. But to elaborate a little more on that, we first need to reestablish where we are. Nope, this is literally how I opened the first Owl House and Amphibia videos. We are not being this lazy for a third time, goddamn. As previously mentioned, Season 3 picks up right where True Colors left off. Isn't that nice? With Anne and the rest of the planters transported to LA. After a tearful reunion with her parents, and Anne explaining where she's been the past few months.
Hold on, back up. You're telling us there's a whole world of talking frogs called Amphibian?
It's actually called Amphibia.
We settle into the new normal for our favorite frog family. Although it's not quite new and it's definitely far from normal. Although it had to be done at the request of the network, adding the Season 3 intro at the end of True Colors was honestly one of the best ways to entice viewers for what was to come. I mean, just the ending alone is enough to evoke when Anne was first stranded in Amphibia. But the full intro made it clear that the sense of adventure and fun of exploring a different world would still be there through the eyes of the planters trying to navigate something as simple as a human shopping mall.
And if one of us screws up, then you can't be trusted to leave the house.
Since when did you set the stage?
Reverse isekai stories are nothing new. There have been just as many stories of a character from a fantasy setting coming to our world as vice versa. In some cases, however, I find these reverse isekai stories even more fun than the traditional ones. Sure, I love the idea of exploring a new world as well as the next guy. Well, maybe not as much as this guy, am I right? I'll have to know the pain. But there are plenty of oddities to our own mundane lives we take for granted, but have plenty of comedic potential for, say, a tiny frog with a compulsion to touch anything and everything he sees.
I may have touched something! Oh, shit.
You don't even have to be from another world to realize this. Think about any tourist that comes from another country or first-time visitors to a really immersive amusement park. If you've lived in a big metropolitan city all your life, you're not gonna treat taking the bus or subway as anything other than an inconvenience that you want to get out of the way as soon as possible.
Oh, shit. Okay, I get them. Let's relax, son. I got them.
But a tourist or new arrival may view it under a completely different lens.
$3.
got 2 bags, 1 me. Say, where does a young prostitute get started in this town?
Heck, to name a more personal example, when my wife first visited me in my hometown while we were long-distance dating, she was vocally astounded by how many mountains there were. Mountains I'd grown up with all my life and had more or less become background scenery I barely noticed in my daily routine.
I've never seen the ocean before. It's beautiful. It always looks like that.
It was incredibly funny when Anne would gawk or recoil at any little thing the planters would treat as an everyday occurrence. But even if you've never been to LA, you can recognize the little things like going to get groceries or going to the movies that probably would be completely alien to interdimensional visitors.
Whoa, what is this, a church?
Yeah, pretty much.
While the show doesn't lose focus on getting back to Amphibia, there's a great deal of time spent on mundane shenanigans, not unlike Anne's first few weeks in Wartwood. And this is actually one of the first major points of contention for a lot of fans. You see, it is a little jarring watching Anne and the Planters have fun misadventures involving a runaway food truck, becoming a frog-themed vigilante, or taking Anne's cat Domino to the vet, when not too long ago we were dealing with the fallout of Sasha's attempted coup on Utopia, and the revelation that Marcy intentionally sent them all to Amphibia, and inadvertently helped King Andreas restart his millennium-long plan of multiversal takeover. And again, stabby stab. Even I can't deny there's a bit of tonal dissonance to the fun shenanigans that go on in early Season 3. But please, allow me to elucidate these dissonant feelings in this incredible and originally titled next section I like to call I think there was an unspoken school of thought that popped up not long after True Colors premiered, officially, that because of its somewhat darker subject matter, Season 3 as a whole would differ in tone compared to what had come before. And I can't say I blame anyone who legitimately thought that. There was a part of me that wondered if the show could go back to the lighthearted wackiness we'd come to know and love. Even with the knowledge that Marcy was alive and relatively well, there was still all the trauma that came with everything to do with True Colors, especially for Anne. She had to process so much in the course of maybe 12 hours. Utter contempt for one of her oldest friends, shocking betrayal from a previously benevolent figure, the reveal of Marcy's own betrayal and selfish escapism, her truest and best friend she's ever had nearly dying, and again, okay, I'll stop using that clip now. Maybe. Yet, not a few minutes later in universe, she casually dismisses any concern for Marcy's well-being with a simple,
"She's alive, Hop-Pop. She's just gotta be."
And sure, she might just be telling herself that so she can deal with one major issue at a time. But realistically, she has no reason to believe that Marcy is anything but deceased after getting impaled with a sword that's at least twice her size.
Oh my f***ing god, she f***ing dead.
There is also the noticeable absence of a few figures that many fans were kind of hoping would make a physical appearance sometime in Season 3. Mainly Marcy and Sasha's parents, who have only ever either been alluded to or heard off screen. A lot of people thought we'd get to see them during Anne's stay in LA, and she'd tell them the hard truth of where their kids are and what's been happening since they all disappeared. But no such scene ever happens. The closest we get is at the end of the Christmas episode, where Anne writes them all an anonymous letter. Yeah, your kids are still missing and will be for some time, but saving them is on my to-do list. Okay, thanks, bye! My own biggest hope for this season was that Anne's underlying trauma would be addressed in some emotional scene with her parents and/or the Planters, or that she might even get some therapy to deal with everything she had to go through. Not even just that one afternoon, but the entirety of her time in Amphibia. I mean, no matter how accustomed she became to life in the silly frog world, she's still a 13-year-old kid who was thrust into a completely alien setting, where the threat of death and danger was waiting around every corner. No matter how resilient you are, that's gonna cause no small amount of mental scarring.
That one's going in the vault. And it's gone.
But to be fair to Brawley and the crew, this may have been a little too dark for what the show was trying to be. As I talked about at length in the other Amphibia video, this is hardly the first time Anne has dealt with some pretty traumatic stuff. And every instance of her dealing with near-death experiences has never really had any lasting negative impact on her besides maybe a hard time getting to sleep at night.
So, turns out tonight's events were a tad traumatic.
Room for 2 more?
And true, the Season 2 opener did kind of address the lingering feeling she had regarding the events of Toad Tower. But she quickly brushes them aside, and the rest of the episode deals more with her guilt over the planters leaving their home exposed to all kinds of dangers while going on the road with her. And these feelings aren't really brought up again until she finally reunites with Sasha in the 3rd Temple episode, which was already so crammed that they couldn't really hash out these feelings as in-depth as I would have liked. And is yet another reason why that episode really should have been longer, but I digress. Still, the show wasn't hesitant to talk about the lingering feelings Anne had about Hop-Pop lying to her about the music box. So I was kind of expecting that everything she went through during True Colors would get some kind of meaningful breakdown regarding her emotions. But such a discussion may have been a little too real for a show aimed at a fairly young demographic. This all probably comes from the simple fact that Amphibia, no matter how much it dissects the typical escapist fantasy, is still an escapist fantasy with a TV Y7 rating. This means, despite a large portion of the audience being way older than the intended demographic for a typical Disney Channel cartoon, that this is still a show for children airing on a child-centric network. And given the utter shit show that was the True Colors delay, I kind of have doubts as to how far Disney was willing to let them go in exploring these themes of trauma regarding Anne's time in Amphibia and what happened that fateful day in Newtopia. Moreover, I recognize that a late 20-something-year-old asking for deeper elements in a show made for kids is kind of silly when you really think about it. I want a 20-minute episode where Anne hashes out all her feelings to a therapist in one take, uncut. Furthermore, we also need to punish this 13-year-old child for making terrible decisions with her teenage hormonal mind and not having the common sense of me, a full-grown adult who has the benefit of a mostly matured mind in hindsight. And why the hell is no one talking about 9/11? That's also not to say that kids' shows can't or shouldn't explore deeper themes like this. There have been plenty of shows aimed at a younger audience that explore concepts like trauma with great care and respect, often through easily digestible metaphors or just straight up acknowledging it as post-traumatic stress. These are concepts that don't exactly have an age limit, unfortunately. So introducing kids to how we recognize and cope with trauma is especially important. But not every show has to dissect it directly, especially when the tone of Amphibia up until this point was never that deep. I mean, not every show has to be like Sally Galaxy Shippuden, right?
I did it! I did the joke! I did the thing again! Do you remember it? Do you remember?
But I'm also not trying to make an easy excuse as to why Amphibia didn't tackle these themes, if it's a major gripe with anybody else either. Again, I don't know if the crew wanted or tried to explore these themes but just weren't allowed to, or if they truly wanted to keep the focus on the lighter tone the series had kept, apart from the really dramatic season finales. There's a multitude of facets you have to consider when discussing the tone of a show like this. The intended demographic, the channel it airs on, and so on and so forth. Would I have liked to see Anne tackle her trauma a bit more bluntly? Yeah, but I also understand if the crew didn't feel like pushing it, just in case Disney got cold feet with that kind of serious subject matter. Again. That said, it's not like the show completely ignores the aftermath of Season 2's finale either. The second segment of Episode 2 sees Sasha struggling with the consequences of her actions in a much more introspective manner than before. We saw her go through a similar journey of self-discovery, following Anne standing up to her at Toad Tower. But rather than examining why Anne stood against her in favor of the slimy little frogs, she immediately threw herself into Grimes' plan of rebellion against Newtopia, using it as an excuse to reassert herself as the domineering force in her trio of friends. But seeing firsthand how her rebellion caused Anne to outright despise her, and inadvertently led to Andreas taking back control of the Calamity Box, Sasha has no choice but to confront her control freak tendencies and how they've destroyed everything she was trying to preserve.
Since when have you cared?
Since I saw the consequences.
Marcy, too, has to contend with the fallout of her terrible truth being revealed to her friends so callously by Andreas. After she's awakened from her rejuvenation and haunted by visions of her friends spitefully telling her they want nothing to do with her, that they could never forgive her after everything she's done.
I'm so sorry.
It's too late. We want nothing to do with you ever again.
So yeah, there's still some heavy stuff the characters have to deal with. But that doesn't mean the show has to be too dark in how it unpacks all this emotional baggage. But all this unpacking relates to another poignant theme in Season 3. One that is especially expounded in Anne's case, as she gets to act as caretaker for the Planters and reunite with her family. This simple theme being a product of the central theme that Brawley has mentioned several times to be the heart of the show. Change. And in every adolescent life, with change comes... I'm sure you've noticed in a lot of the media you consume, but in a number of TV shows or long-running movie franchises, you can always expect a certain familiarity by the time an episode ends and another begins. Sure, there might be some big twists or shakeups along the way, but by the end of a Simpsons episode, you can always expect them to be back on the couch at the start of the next one. Or at the start of a James Bond movie, you can always expect him to have ditched his girlfriend named after a part of the female anatomy from the last movie, in favor of a new girlfriend with an even stupider name for this adventure. I mean, geez, Madeline Swan? This isn't always a bad thing. Serialization lends itself well to newcomers not having to worry too hard about anything they might have missed if they're coming into the story several seasons or movies in. If you happen to catch Friends during its 8th season, you won't have to worry too hard about the major plot developments, because the characters are more or less the same people they've always been. The ditzy hippie, the cool guy who gets around, the self-absorbed but well-meaning fashionista, the one who was in all the Scream movies, the other guy, and that one asshole who should have been ostracized from the group years ago. Yeah, I was being intentionally blasé with the others for a laugh, but I'm being dead serious here. F*** Ross. We've discussed many times on this channel that network executives for kids' TV especially prefer serialized shows like this over more plot-heavy ones. There are some notable exceptions, of course, but even thinking back to slightly more mature shows for kids, they tended not to have long arcs that spanned multiple episodes outside the occasional two-parter. And that's also not to say that character development can never happen on these kinds of shows. But if it does happen, then it's more in the vein of character changes behavior in the course of a single episode and has to learn a lesson to revert to their neutral state of being. This type of serialization was never Brawley's intent when he pitched Amphibia. He and the rest of the crew wanted to make a show built on the idea of change. Hence the reason why frogs were included as the major species, since their entire life cycle is built around it. Nowhere is this idea of change more apparent than in our main hero, who, in Brawley's own words, starts the show being kind of a huge jerk. It's easy to forget if you haven't seen the earlier episodes in a long time, but when Anne first comes to Amphibia, she's far from the wide-eyed idealist character, ready to make her name in a strange new land of whimsy and wonder. Nah, fam, this kid absolutely hates it here and barely gets along with anybody besides Sprig at first. Constantly butting heads with Hop-Pop, routinely squicked out by the local inhabitants of Wartwood, using any excuse she can to get out of an honest day's work. Anne fits the archetype of a self-centered teen to a T when she first starts out. But she's also not just an archetype. She learns from her mistakes. She grows as a person the more time she spends in Wartwood. She gladly comes to the defense of the slimy frogs she couldn't even stand to look at back on Earth. And she takes all this experience and growth with her when she returns to her world, much to the surprise of her own parents.
No offense, Anne, but you're the literal poster child for hating responsibility. Just look at what you drew as a kid.
Anne goes above and beyond in not just stepping up to do household chores she wouldn't touch before, but in pouring every ounce of her energy into finding a way to get the Planters back home, even at the expense of her own well-being, which is something she's always struggled with. I'm sure she'll get over it with no consequences by the end, though. But even then, she still struggles with certain aspects of her newfound responsibility, like wanting to forego a visit to the local Thai temple in order to learn more about an ancient artifact from Amphibia, or in lying by omission to her parents about the complete truth of being hunted by King Andrias. In the case of the former, Anne has always felt a certain tedium attending the Thai temple, seeing it more as something her parents have forced her to do ever since she was a kid. However, upon seeing how the planters immersed themselves in various aspects of Thai culture, and learning from her mom how the community rallied around the Boon Choys when Anne went missing, she starts to see the temple in a different light.
The community ran our stove here and sent us the money, even help out at the restaurant.
That's really cool.
It is pretty cool.
It's understandable that she'd take even her own culture and community for granted. She may have gotten a greater sense of responsibility while she was in Amphibia, but she's still a teenager after all. She's not going to have a perfect perspective. Nor is she going to readily admit to her parents that the despotic ruler of the world she's trying to get back to is desperately trying to kill her. Of course, this secret doesn't last very long when the stealth robot Andrea sends to kill Anne runs all out of stealth to give once the big guy gives him an ultimatum.
You have 1 hour to destroy that kid, or the bomb planted in your chest will destroy you. Okay, cool. Andrea's out.
Anne hates hiding the truth from her parents when they've been so proud at how honest and upfront she's been about everything, and even admits to Sprig that she wants to tell them the complete truth right before the robot attacks them, causing her mom to think she's been hiding the truth to shirk responsibility like she would do before.
You're still the same irresponsible little girl who used to cut class. When are you going to grow up? When are you going to stop getting in trouble? When and when?
I don't know, okay?
The thing that's always been great about Anne's character development is that the writers never lose sight that even with all the growth she goes through, Anne is still just a kid who is in way over her head. She'll still make mistakes even when she's trying to do the right thing, which ultimately makes her a better person than the kid who went along with any horrible mistake her friends made, at the risk of them possibly not wanting to be her friends anymore.
I thought the protagonist was pretty fun. I liked how she was very flawed and had room to grow.
Which also brings us to Sasha's maturation. Immediately after the events of True Colors, Sasha and Grime escape Andrias' castle and seek shelter at Wartwood, telling the townsfolk the half-truth that Andrias has become drunk with power and is preparing an army to conquer the world, but that Anne also sent them to protect the town. Wartwood, slow to accept and even slower to respect, immediately buys the lie thanks to Sasha being Anne's best friend, which doesn't entirely sit right with her. Grime has the pragmatic plan of cutting their losses and ditching the frogs at the first sign of trouble. But Sasha's guilt-ridden conscience only grows worse the more the frogs lavish them with thank you gifts and praises.
Free bread, anyone? Ah! Get away from me! Don't want the extra carbs, eh? I get it.
At Grime's behest, she finally enters the planter's house and finds Anne's diary, that I'm pretty sure we've never actually seen her have or write in up to this point.
It's the amulet to Valencia.
I don't think I've ever seen it before.
I mean, I do take it off every now and then, but maybe you're thinking of one of those times.
No, I saw plenty of you when we were in that dungeon. And then on the way from Valencia, when we went through security at the border, we had to put all of our stuff in that basket.
I've always worn it, okay?
Reading Anne's latest entry just before they went to Natopia drives the guilt further, where she talks about being so happy that she and Sasha were able to work out their problems after Toad Tower, and that they were finally going home together. Sasha wanted so hard to regain the sense of control she had over Anne at the cost of practically all of Amphibia, and she assumed that because Anne just went along with all of her plans before, that she'd do the same once they were on good terms again. Seeing the harm she's done to Anne and to the unsuspecting frogs of Wartwood, it finally hits home just how low she's sunk.
Well, that ends now. I want to be someone better. Someone that deserves you. I know what I have to do.
Sasha comes clean to the town residents and steps up to be their actual protector, inspiring Grime to do the same, and the rest of the town to rally behind them, sparking the beginnings of a resistance that will stand against Andreas while they await the return of Anne and the Planters. It's safe to say both girls have come a long way from the two kids who played hooky from school during Anne's birthday. Anne learning to stand up for herself and take responsibility, and Sasha learning to put aside what benefits her in favor of others. Marcy too learns a harsh lesson of maturity, but to get into that would take us into spoiler town, so give it another 4 hours, we'll get there eventually. The Planter children learn their own little lessons on maturity throughout their antics in LA as well. But as they're still at that age where they don't have to take on as much responsibility in the wake of looming adulthood, they don't receive quite as much character development as the three human leads. Something that, again, I noticed was pretty controversial among the more vocal critics of this season, who felt the Planters had a somewhat reduced presence to the overall plot. While I won't argue their involvement in the eventual finale might leave a little to be desired, I would argue that their antics throughout the first half of Season 3 are still an important part of what makes this show so good. Not only cementing Anne's personal growth compared to when she first met them, but their own growth as well. And what better way to trick the audience into thinking they're just watching a silly show with frogs before making them weep with beautiful character moments than through who doesn't love a healthy dose of shenanigans involving frog people in LA? And yes, I realize I just had an entire segment about how the silly misadventures the Planters go through is kinda dissonant to the tone of True Colors. Shut up. Taking these episodes at face value, there's a lot of unique scenarios each of the Planters find themselves in that not only build upon the many character arcs they've had in prior seasons, but take them in new directions as well. The biggest unexpected development is probably with Polly, who just went through a major milestone in frog adolescence by growing legs during the events of True Colors.
Oh, sorry! Just practicing my jump kick. Yeah!
While she retains the same brash and rambunctious thirst for trouble she had before, she also picks up a new talent for robotics as she spends a lot of her free time trying to repair Frobo, her robot buddy who was broken by Andreas when he tried to protect her. Her efforts to rebuild him herself lead to more than a few mishaps.
Finally, my new one-of-a-kind limited edition controller just came in. Aww.
So she pours herself into hours of DIY research online, eventually finding a channel run by two IT specialists, whose videos and personal advice help Polly get Frobo up and running again, even when she promised the others she wouldn't work on him until they got back to Amphibia.
I thought you were looking at cat videos. Gosh, dang it, Polly, you outfoxed me again.
While the episode's moral is that Polly shouldn't rush Frobo's repair, even though she misses him, the major takeaway is that the little Pollywog has turned into a technical whiz at the ripe old age of 5, using the near-endless resources of the internet to improve her mind and skills, whereas people 10 times her age use it to post cringe political minion memes on Facebook or watch cat videos all day.
Did someone say cat videos?
Ain't that cute?
Ah! The backyard!
Hop-Pop also gets some unexpected growth in regards to the long-running gag of him being a failed, aspiring actor. And what better town for this aspirant thespian to have landed in than LA, the acting capital of the United States. At least for movies.
Movies are better!
It's while they're playing tourist in Hollywood that Hop-Pop gets his first big break, joining a casting call for fellow geriatrics that lands him a lucrative commercial deal.
Say what?
The only reason he got this big break in the first place, however, is because a fellow aspiring actor let him take his place in line, causing Hop-Pop to wonder if he's actually deserving of this success. Not helped when he encounters him later on at his usual 9 to 5.
Where are you off to? I have an audition up there.
Bravo, my friend, bravo! Even if I never make it, it's enough to know an old fart like me did.
In an inconceivable act of goodwill, HP extends the same courtesy Humphrey gave to him, and allows him to take an even more lucrative audition for a movie role, closing the book on a huge desire the old frog has had for ages. Speaking as someone who wanted to be an actor when he was younger, It's never an easy thing to admit you're not cut out for the career you've longed for. But fortunately, Hop-Pop takes it in stride.
Besides, this whole experience has taught me that the real power is behind the camera. From now on, I want to be a director.
As for Sprig, well, he just wants to be liked.
How can I help? How can I help? How can I help?
One episode sees Mr. Boonchoy showing him and the other planters his favorite movie, Tarantulad, The World I Call Home, which inspires Sprig to don his own vigilante visage, christening himself Frogman. Fighter of the night, man!
Oh, champion of the sun!
His intentions start out noble enough, wanting to make an impression on the human world the way Anne did in Wartwood. But he quickly becomes wrapped up in his own hype, earning the ire of Otto, a local neighborhood watch patrol guy who takes his job a little too seriously.
I'm writing you kids up. You need a permit to sell goods on this street.
Mom's gonna hate this. Dude, we're 8.
Becoming jealous of Frogman's popularity, Otto dons his own costume and battles Sprig for the quote-unquote
the soul of a city. A battle I intend to win.
All right, I know how this goes. So when does Sprig reveal he and Otto's mom have the same name? Otto's granddaughter, Molly Jo, calls out their showboating for what it is, forcing Sprig to eat some crow and admit there were probably less flashy and property-destroying ways to help people. Otto also admits he was wrong in his jealousy, joining forces to fix the damage they caused. With the lesson of the day learned, Sprig makes amends with Molly Jo and hangs up his costume for good. All's well that ends well.
You're definitely under arrest. Fair enough.
An earlier episode saw his desire to be liked fixated on Mrs. Boonchoy, wanting to be seen as part of her family like Anne is part of his. But Hop-Pop tells him that they just aren't there yet, and probably won't be for some time, making Sprig realize the folly in his ways of trying to force a familial connection and backing down in order to integrate himself to Mrs. Boonchoy in a much more thoughtful and respectful way. I'm just kidding, of course he tries to force it.
Ow.
At the Boonchoy's Thai restaurant, Sprig tries to prove himself as family by running off a local foodie who's parked his Thai-themed food truck right in front of Thai Go, practically begging Mrs. Boonchoy to go into business with him so he can take her food across the country.
This recipe are for family only.
Well, when you change your mind, you know where to find me.
Sprig's efforts prove unhelpful, with Mrs. Boonchoy placing his bad behavior on Anne.
Why'd she yell at you for something I did? She's not about to yell at a guest, Sprig.
Ouch, Anne. Thanks for rubbing it in.
Eventually, he resorts to trying to sabotage the food truck, resulting in him and Anne accidentally taking it for a joyride.
The brakes aren't working!
Newman!
Sprig apologizes to Mrs. Boonchoy once they catch up with them, saying he should have respected her boundaries. While Mrs. Boonchoy admits she probably shouldn't have treated him like such an outsider, when she knows he means a lot to Anne. Which also has the unexpected benefit of getting the foodie to realize he's kind of been driving away business from the restaurant he loves so much by parking a similar themed and named food truck right in front of it.
I just realized this is a gross appropriation of your culture, and I should just show myself out.
In the second segment of the same episode, Hop-Pop has similar concerns about how the Boonchoy see them when he realizes they've been staying with them long enough to be considered freeloaders, wanting them all to earn their keep by offering to take Domino to the vet, while Anne's mom takes her to the dentist and Mr. Boonchoy works a shift at the restaurant. The episode sees the planters dealing with all sorts of wonderful feline quirks.
Holy frog, it's got claws!
There's blood everywhere!
That escalate to the point of Domino escaping her kennel, something I'm sure my own cats would love to do whenever we take them to the vet.
Luna!
You poor baby. You suffer.
Though Hop-Pop insists they can get her back themselves, eventually the kids call Mr. Boonchoy, who comes to bail them out, with HP lamenting that he must consider them filthy freeloaders. To which Mr. B finally sets him straight.
You three took my daughter into your home when she needed it most. You kept her fed and safe for 5 months just out of the kindness of your heart.
You will never owe us anything. Ever.
It's not exactly uncommon for Amphibia to have little morals and life lessons at the end of nearly every episode. A lot of shows have that kind of format where the characters will learn some valuable wisdom so parents can feel like their kids are learning something while they watch cartoons.
Wheel of morality, turn, turn, turn. Tell us the lesson that we should learn.
As I've gotten older, I kinda find myself feeling a little ambivalent to this structure. No particular reason why even, I guess it just feels kind of hokey or ingenuine in some shows where a lot of the humor relies on nastier jokes and the characters hating or insulting each other throughout most of it.
Geometry, geology, geography. I don't know what the problem is. They all start with J. Here's another J word for you. Idiot!
The nice thing about shows like Amphibia, though, is that a lot of the humor doesn't really consist of that level of cynicism that seemed to permeate the 2000s. Much of the humor comes more from the exaggerated shenanigans the characters find themselves in, and how they play off each other. Almost as if you don't have to endlessly rely on the characters being jerks or acting miserable to get a laugh out of people. Ahem. Even if some of these lessons and morals are pretty obvious to me, a 28-year-old man who watches shows for children, they're still executed with a lot of care and thought, especially in how the characters take these lessons going forward. And the time the planters spend in LA is incredibly important to deepening their bond with Anne, as she gets to share her world and culture with them, as they shared theirs with her. But of course, it's not all shenanigans this season. Andreas is on the warpath, trying his damnedest to kill Anne and sever her connection with the Calamity Box before she can return. And on top of that, the planters soon find themselves on the FBI's radar, followed by the mysterious and unflinching Mr. X. Mr. X! But the benefit of all their shenanigans in LA is that they've made a lot of friends who can pay the planters' kindness forward when the time comes. And this is honestly one of the best parts of all the previous shenanigans I went into excruciating detail about. They weren't just shenanigans, they were Once Andreas' stealth robot is dealt with, the major antagonist Anne and the others face on Earth is Mr. X, a flamboyant but scarily competent FBI agent specializing in extraterrestrials. He and the planters have several run-ins with each other that nearly result in their capture each time, finally succeeding in the first episode of Season 3B. Fortunately, he elects to ignore the Boonchoys, considering them not worth the effort of actually arresting, freeing them to call some backup in order to free the frogs. Earlier in the season, they managed to make some connections with people who furthered their quest to get them back to Amphibia, such as Dr. Jan, curator of the local museum who helped them decipher a clue from an old amphibian vase, and Terry, a budding scientist who has some experience with interdimensional portals. These two actually show up earlier in the same episode to test out the portal that might get the planters back to Amphibia. But in order to break the frogs out of custody, Anne calls in the big guns, aka everyone from the past 10 episodes.
What do you mean everyone?
Everyone!
Yes, every seemingly minor one-off character who made a connection with the planters during their aforementioned shenanigans comes back. Humphrey, the IT girls, Molly Jo, 2 older ladies from the Thai temple. The only side character who never really comes back at all is Ned, the foodie who tried to run his own Thai food truck, which... I can take him or leave him.
I can't believe I have to drive all the way to work on a Saturday. All the way to work!
Bringing in all these average civilians to try and break the planters out of the heavily guarded FBI compound seems a little silly when you really hold it under scrutiny. But it serves a thematic purpose that underlies the entire show. That one good turn inspires another. All of these characters bonded with the planters through common interests or good deeds, and all of them in turn inspired the planters to better themselves in some way or another. So it's only fitting that they all come back to lend them a hand when they need it most. And again, you can argue the logistics of this plan till the cows come home, why they needed to bring Molly Jo at all when anybody could have done her job, how the real-life FBI would never fall for the obvious ploy with Humphrey, but also, it's a show for kids. If you really wanted the FBI to behave like they do in real life, they'd have probably broken into the Boonchoys' home and abducted everybody ages ago. Bringing back all these characters also brings to mind the moment when the residents of Wartwood stepped up to defend Anne against the Toad Tower tax collectors. Nope, can't do it. Cementing their solidarity with the strange creature from another world and accepting her as one of their own. All these characters from all the misadventures the Planters have been on throughout the first half of Season 3, banding together, even when some of them have only just found out the Planters were actually frog people the whole time. It's an understated but incredibly cathartic denouement to their time in Los Angeles. The same is true for Anne's relationship with her parents, who obviously have much more relevance to the plot by nature of being the main character's parents, but still represent a very important turning point for her before she goes back to Amphibia for the final leg of her journey. Throughout her return, Anne has gotten much closer to both of her parents than ever before. And sure, she loved them already, but before all this, she was very much at that age where she was starting to emotionally distance herself from her family, wanting to make her own decisions and live her own life with all the overconfidence of a young teenager who thinks she knows everything. Being away from them for so long and spending more time with them after everything she's learned thus far makes her realize just how important they are to her, and the prospect of leaving them again is more than a bit daunting for her. A dagger in her side that's twisted a little more when X mocks her for how seemingly in over her head she is.
You're nothing but a child. Heck, you wouldn't have even gotten this far without your mommy and daddy.
But,
Anne's tearful admittance that she probably is in over her head with all this if she can't even say goodbye to her parents is followed by them both stating how proud they are of her, pointing out how much she's accomplished so far that most people thrice her age could never even fathom.
You have grown so much. You're not my little girl anymore, Anne. You can do this.
We'll be with you the whole way, right here. I'm pointing to your heart in case you didn't get it.
I got it, Dad.
All these connections that Anne and the Planters have forged during their brief but memorable time on Earth is a perfect reflection to all the connections Anne made during her brief but memorable time in Amphibia. And as she and the Planters finally return to their world with the help of her calamity powers, they soon find they'll need these connections, physical and emotional, in order to build an army to take back the Planters home while saving Anne's in the process. And with the forces King Andrias is building to conquer hundreds upon thousands of dimensions, they're gonna need all the help they can get. The Planters' return to Wartwood is much colder than they were probably anticipating. Of course, when they left Amphibia, they saw firsthand that Andrias had the power to lift up his castle and summon an army of robots on command. But even with all that, they probably weren't expecting the destruction of their world in preparation for war to be this bad. It helps that they're almost immediately intercepted by members of the Resistance, including Mrs. Croker, One-Eyed Wally, an incredibly swole Loggle.
I've been lifting weights every single day since you've been gone. Who knew I had these kinds of gains in me all along?
And the commander of the Resistance.
You're back! Sasha! You're alive!
And in Wartwood? What's going on?
Follow me, and I'll explain.
Heading back to the secret basement in the Planter's house, Sasha, Grime, and the rest of the Resistance fill Anne and the others in with what's been happening the past few months. Marcy is alive but being held prisoner. The robots are destroying every town that steps out of line. And the king is using some kind of mind control on some of the larger wildlife of Amphibia to turn them into his obedient zombies.
Gee, wonder where I've heard that before.
I turned you into zombies one time.
While Wartwood has shown its brass against the king to have survived this long, they recognize a direct assault with just their forces would be impossible, and so they'll need allies. The rest of the season is spent rebelling against Andrias' forces in small but effective acts of sabotage, contending with marauding amphibians taking advantage of all the carnage, and most importantly, building an army by reaching out not just to fellow frogs, but to newts, toads, and even the mystical and highly self-isolated Olms. More importantly than that, though, is the fact that this is where those who have stuck with the series even through the slower slice-of-life episodes of Season 1 will be rewarded in abundance. because nearly every minor character who seemed like just a one-off antagonist of the week comes back in increasingly brilliant ways. Be that the more comedic payoff of this creepy Willy Wonka-looking motherfucker who cursed Sprig and Ann, coming back as the leader of a group of frog marauders.
Turns out I've got a sweet tooth for anarchy!
Or the unexpected return of several antagonists who managed to do a complete 180 and join the fight for Amphibia's future. Tritonio, Gary the mind-controlling fungus, Domino 2, even the two Olm twins Sprig and Polly met in Season 2 on the road to Newtopia. Not only just characters, these episodes explore other factors from the previous seasons. Sprig and Ivy's relationship, Toadie's lack of self-esteem, and, of course, the main human trio's fractured relationship. These are all things that would be fine enough without knowing the full context. But if you have taken the time to invest in the show, even when a lot of episodes in Season 1 that had these characters and concepts didn't seem to further the overall plot, you're gonna get so much more out of seeing them come back with even more relevance here. Matt Brawley has mentioned several times that he really dislikes the term filler when you talk about episodes that don't seem to further the overall story. And over time, I've really come to agree with him. Sure, slower slice-of-life episodes aren't going to be to everybody's taste, but as I said in the last video, even in seemingly unimportant filler episodes, you might get a really poignant moment of character examination or growth that you might not have time for in an episode that's more focused on building the lore or overarching narrative. That's what Season 1 excelled at, and why I think it's a terrible idea to recommend to newcomers that they can just skip over most of it besides the Sasha episodes if they think they aren't being grabbed by it. Oh god, that was real. If you really did skip over most of Season 1, you'd miss Anne slowly getting to know and love each of the planters and the town of Wartwood as a whole. You would miss her character growth from well-meaning but ultimately vapid teen to a genuinely selfless and self-assured hero. And now with Season 3, you would miss the meta-catharsis of seeing just how many characters and plot elements make a comeback. Speaking in terms of plot progression, one episode sees the Resistance reaching out to Grimes' sister, Beatrix, to aid their cause with her own Toad army, who have been in hiding ever since their failed coup. She's hesitant to help out a bunch of lowly frogs, with only Spriggs boasting that he managed to beat Grime in combat back in Utopia piquing her interest, in mocking her younger brother relentlessly for it.
Living with frogs has made my brother laughably weak. Thanks for wasting my time.
He tries to save face by challenging her to Toad combat, but it backfires when she chooses Sprig as an opponent, saying she'll join the frog's army if she loses. But if she wins, they'll have to join hers.
As cannon fodder.
The bulk of the episode sees Grime reluctantly teaching Sprig the ways of Toad Arena fighting, so he stands even a small chance of beating Beatrix. The only hiccup being how much he and Sprig can't stand each other.
You tried to kill my Hop-Pop!
He was a political liability!
Another episode sees Ann and Sprig running into Tritonio, a newt who tricked the planter children into robbing a train for him back in Season 1, now running schemes with his own band of merry men, stealing from the rich and giving to themselves. Ann sees potential in his scheme-making, however, offering to help pull off a major heist if he agrees to join the Resistance. But Tritonio's rough upbringing has left him with a warped moral code to always look out for himself above all others, causing him to abandon his gang, whom he's grown to love like family, when the plan goes south. Anne says nuts to that, however, and tells him like it is.
You're leaving the best loot in the world on the table. Friendship, comrades, someone to count on. By throwing those things away, you're only robbing yourself.
Both of these episodes not only progress the plot in gaining strong allies for the Resistance, but also act as great moments of character growth for mainstayers Sprig and Grime, and for Tritonio, a one-off antagonist from Season 1 who was mainly an extended Inigo Montoya parody voiced by Strongbad.
Corn is no place for a mighty warrior!
The former two learn to put aside their differences, with Grime teaching Sprig to combine Toad techniques with his own natural frog abilities to absolutely decimate Beatrix in the arena. And Tritonio takes Anne's words to heart and finally looks out for someone other than himself. These two moments also serve as foreshadowing to when the three major armies finally meet up, and long-standing rifts between the frogs, toads, and newts are resurfaced.
Typical. A snobby newt and a bully of a toad. Why am I not surprised?
That does it! This alliance is over!
I mentioned in the previous video that there was sort of a pyramid system to the politics of Amphibia, with newts on the top, toads serving as their enforcers, and frogs generally being lower working class. Something that really didn't sit right with Raggedy Andy especially.
I'll tell you something, I'm getting pretty sick and tired of all the dumb things that go on around here.
And once the frogs, toads, and newts are all together in one crowded space, these socio-political consternations start to boil over.
Guys, remember, this is about supporting each other.
Support? I got your support right here!
Anne is confident she can whip the three armies into a cooperative unit, doing all kinds of team bonding exercises that blow up spectacularly in her face.
Yeah, nailed it!
Things only escalate to the point of an all-out brawl, causing Anne to lose her shit and call them all out for their petty squabbling.
All this time I thought I could solve your problems and heal this rift, but I was wrong. I can't solve this problem for you. Only you can. So when you're ready to work together and save the world, let me know.
Well, geez, Anne, all you had to do was organize a hootenanny and sing a song about how great they are and how awesome their world is. A horse could figure that out. Centaur World streaming now.
Smash Mondays at 10!
While Anne's intentions are noble, it was probably a bit too optimistic to assume she could resolve all the societal issues of Amphibia in one afternoon. And while the three armies do put aside their differences after being told off, it's going to take a lot more to truly come to terms with the near millennia worth of inequity that began, ironically enough, through one of the best examples of friendship between the three major races. A friendship that, unfortunately, was doomed to tragedy, thanks to a misguided sense of upholding honor and legacy, spiraling into an all-out war against the very fabric of nature itself. And, much like the current-day problems Anne and the others face, it's all Andreas's fault.
This is all your fault, Jafar.
Okay, that may be simplifying it a little too much. Let me explain. Andreas certainly did himself no favors with the fanbase after his true colors were revealed in... true colors. Didn't I already make that bad joke? His callous disregard for the lives of the planters, as well as literally stabbing a literal child in the back, literally, meant that any goodwill he had built up from acting like a huge goofus was well and dried up by the time Season 3 started. But we also come to find pretty early on in Season 3 that Andreas's huge goofus persona wasn't entirely an act. In between ordering his cloakbot to kill Anne, he has it run errands for him, like getting the latest book in a young adult detective series that Marcy got him into, and also getting some potato chips to snack on.
And maybe some of those potato chip things she had.
Eliminate potato chip.
After his demeanor took a much more menacing turn at the end of Season 2, I was pretty certain we'd seen the last of the Jolly Blue Giant, and he'd be a much colder character now that he didn't have to pull the wool over everyone's eyes. The twist being that he wasn't really pulling that much wool. Being a goofus is just kind of his natural state, even when he's being serious.
And if anyone resists, give them a stern talking to.
Oh, not too bad.
Just kidding. Terminate them.
While I'm certainly not opposed to more no-nonsense villains who are just as cruel and cold as they appear to be, I also have a fondness for the villains that are capable of having a threatening presence, while still being kind of funny in their own way. And hearing Keith David, no stranger to no-nonsense, cold and cruel villain types in the past, playing an overgrown salamander flipping out over his inability to get good is really freaking funny.
Dang it! It's the stupid controller's fault. I was so close to...
With his natural disposition being so at odds with his tyrannical plans of conquest, you're kind of left to wonder where this dichotomy came from. A question whose answer has been alluded to in hindsight, but isn't fully elaborated until later in Season 3. But to peel back that layer of the big stinky onion that is King Andrias, we first need to address the malevolent-looking robot in the room. One of the things I intentionally neglected to mention in my last Amphibia vid was this thing, the core. Mainly because, at the time of its reveal at the end of the first temple, I had no idea what the heck it even was.
What the hell is that?
Andrias goes into a secret room, he walks past vague lore stuff we saw before in the sleepover episode, he talks about a prophecy being undone, and then this thing is shown to be chilling in his basement, and that is the last we see or hear of it in Season 2.
Alright then, keep your secrets.
I was certain that the core, as it would later be known, would be elaborated on in the Season 2 finale, but again, with the benefit of hindsight, trying to cram in an explanation for it in the middle of everything else going on would have been way too much to deal with. Besides, it's much more effective to give a proper explanation later on, when the core assimilates itself with Marcy, using her as a parasitic host due to her incredible intelligence.
Hey, you kid! Get away from there!
I would not mess with that thing.
Don't put your lips on it!
And what exactly is the core, you ask?
I didn't, but go ahead.
It's a collection of the minds of the past rulers of Amphibia, who uploaded their consciousness into a sort of hard drive before their deaths, biding their time for when they could find a proper host to lead their army into a multiversal war, as they had already been doing for countless of years before Andrias' reign. Basically, the core is an allegory for a legacy of unchecked colonialism. A legacy that has loomed over Andrias' shoulder since the moment he was born. Near the middle of Season 3B, we finally get a flashback episode explaining just what the big guy's baggage really is. And it has to do with a very familiar friendship dynamic between a very unlikely trio of amphibians. Over 1,000 years ago, Prince Andrias had a very tight-knit friendship with a toad guard named Beryl and the castle gardener frog named Leaf. A friendship that his father, King Aldrich, coldly rebuffs.
Don't you think it's time to say goodbye to those childhood friends of yours, son? It won't be long before those two start asking for favors, using you.
No, Leaf and Beryl would never do that. Our friendship is true.
Aldrich soon introduces his son to the core, and to the Calamity Box that powers much of their technology, placing him in charge of its care, as well as the upcoming invasion of Earth to mine it for resources.
Now, make me proud, son.
Yes, of course, Father.
While showing off the box to Leaf and Beryl, the former receives a terrible vision of death and destruction across Amphibia, warning the king that if they continue their way of life, it could have devastating consequences not only to their world, but to the multiverse at large. A warning the king quickly dismisses.
You speak of fate and warnings, but the stones are our sacred birthright. They are unique to our world and proof that only we are destined to conquer.
Though Andrias is still quick to defend Leaf, the pressure his father puts on him as the next in line is enough to poison the well a little, and it only gets worse when Leaf takes matters into her own hands, stealing the box and disappearing into the night.
Leaf.
This was the start of Andrias' long descent into darkness, banishing Beryl to the outskirts of the kingdom to defend villages for his failure to capture Leaf, and spending the next millennium biding his time until the box would return, as predicted by an ancient prophecy mentioned by his father.
And only then can you begin to redeem yourself.
Their colonialist legacy buried, Newtopia's former glory diminished, and Andrias seethed in Leaf's act of betrayal, letting it turn his heart to stone. Or so he would like to think. Andrias is a tragic and cautionary tale of just how damaging the impact of legacy can be. The legacy of a society that believes in jingoistic exceptionalism, who use their power to conquer those weaker than them, to tear up the beautiful ecosystem of their world because they have the divine right to do so. While this doesn't make Andrias blameless in the terrible acts he committed, it shows him to be the latest in a long line of rulers manipulated by the idea of divine legacy. The words of his ancestors, including his father, whispering in his ear for well over 1,000 years, telling him that he has to atone for the mistake of letting the box get away and restoring their former glory. So when the first inklings of the prophecy start to unfold with the arrival of Marcy, he'll go to any lengths to earn the approval of his forebears.
You have forebears?
And after his ass was so handily given to him by a 13-year-old, a bit of good old-fashioned petty revenge probably has something to do with it too. But still, when you really think about it, Andreas isn't all that different from where Anne started out when the show began. I mean, yeah, Anne would probably never stoop as low as Andreas did, but she also wasn't much of a doer compared to her more active friends. She was much more of a follower. Someone who went along with the status quo and bounced from one idea of Sasha's or Marcy's to the next. Andreas is basically if you took that to its highest extreme. Blindly going along with what his ancestors want, never really asking what he wanted to do with his life, and trying desperately to get their approval by doing some pretty shady things. Because if your ancestors want more resources to invade worlds, you get it for them. If your ancestors want a new body to control, you give it to them. And if your ancestors want you to use a crazy music box from Frog Knows Where to restart a multiversal invasion plan, even if you really don't want to, you do it, okay? Because if you don't, they might not consider you their family anymore. But hey, I mentioned something about a prophecy in regards to Leaf's vision. What's that all about? Well, that has more to do with one of the other major themes of Season 3 that I need to address before we get into the nitty-gritty of the climax. A theme that's pretty familiar to these kinds of stories, but bears repeating because of its unfortunate continuing relevance. The simple but enduring conflict of man versus nature. Or, I guess it would technically be called I mentioned in the past video that some of the biggest sources of inspiration for Matt Brawley in developing Amphibia were movies like The Lord of the Rings and the various works of Studio Ghibli. And if you're familiar with those narratives, then you probably won't be too surprised to see the environmentalist turn Season 3 takes in regards to Andreas' decimation of the countryside to fuel his war machine. And it's not like the show gets all ferngully or anything.
Can't you feel its pain?
Oh, shut up.
But the idea of preserving the fragility of nature is still worth discussing, as it does tie into the story in a fairly underplayed way. The first time this theme really comes to the forefront is in the episode Olivia and Yunan, wherein Andreas' advisor, Lady Olivia, talks about her family's history in a flashback with Marcy.
I am a descendant of a long line of newts who made a sacred vow to care for this land. The trees, the plants, the animals.
This sacred vow is immediately contrasted with the current state of the land surrounding Newtopia. The trees cut down, the wildlife forcefully removed from their natural habitat, and all Lady Olivia can do is watch it happen, powerless to go against her loyalty to the king. At least until she overhears him mumbling to the core and thinks he's gone off his rocker, deciding then and there that her sacred vow is much more important than her royal duties.
Lady Olivia, if you're going to talk treason, I insist that you do it in private.
This leads to a formal team-up between herself and General Yunan. Oh, you know what? I don't think I mentioned her in the last video at all, did I? Well, this is...
I am General Yunan, Scourge of the Sand Wars, defeater of Ragnar the Wretched, the youngest newt to ever achieve the rank of general in the great Newtopian army!
Okay.
As they try to save Marcy and sneak out of the castle, each of them are forced to deal with security holograms that present their biggest fears, with Olivia's being the disappointment of her mother in failing her sacred vow.
I'm sorry, Mother. I did everything I could.
Well...
Enough!
Seeing the land laid to waste around Newtopia and Wartwood is an especially bitter pill to swallow, as we spent so much time in the previous season seeing just how luscious and beautiful the countryside and swamp really was. Replacing the rich foliage and shades of green with a murky brown and dull earth tones really drives home the cost of war and how nothing is sacred in it. Honestly, when the planters first return to Wartwood and see the destruction, it reminded me a lot of the scouring of the Shire in Return of the King, where the hobbits finally come home after fulfilling their quest and see it in utter ruin. The land they fought so hard to protect, becoming a dark shadow of its former self, despite their best efforts to stop the war from ever reaching that far. This part of the book wasn't included in the movie thanks to how frickin' long it already was, and I've never exactly missed its absence having seen the movie first. But there is something so poignantly sad about this homecoming that reflects J.R.R. Tolkien's utter disdain not just for war, but the unchecked industrialization that destroyed the beautiful countryside he grew up in. Sure, as long as capitalism exists and the global population is so huge, there will always be the unending need to expand. But man's arrogant belief that nature bows to us instead of the other way around will be our own downfall if we take it too far. And so the same's true with frogs. The purpose of Leaf's vision is to illustrate this fact, almost as if the box itself was warning her what would happen, knowing that, being a gardener, she would do anything she could to keep the power of the gems away from power-grubbing tyrants like Andrias's family. This is also where the prophecy finally comes into play.
The prophecy.
The prophecy has been alluded to a few times before in the previous season, and even all the way back in Season 1 in the vaguest of senses.
Could it be, Leander? Could she be the one we've been searching for? No, Leander! Not on the carpet!
But the prophecy is finally brought to Anne and the Planters' attention during their stay in Los Angeles, where they come across a vase. A vase. Look, I know someone's gonna get upset no matter how I pronounce it, so whatever.
The vase! Shit!
With ancient amphibian writing on it that I mentioned in passing like 40 minutes ago. The writing tells the reader to seek the Mother of Olms. She will guide you to your destiny.
That doing anything for anyone?
Not especially.
No siree.
Once they're back in Amphibia, they eventually visit the ancient Olm city of Proteus, where Mother Olm resides, waiting to relay the ancient information that can save their world. When she remembers it.
Wait, how did it go again? Hold on, it'll come back to me.
Following some magical school bus-ass shenanigans, you guys remember that episode where they go into Arnold's body? That shit was wild. Mother Olm eventually remembers she wrote the prophecy on the ceiling, which kinda renders the magical school bus-ass shenanigans irrelevant, but whatever, at least they all had fun.
Worst mission ever!
Anyway, the prophecy goeth thusly.
3 stars burning bright, come from beyond to expel the night. Should they fight or embrace the fall, their choice will determine the fate of all.
Mother Olm mentions that her kind have been attuned to the nature of the Calamity Box and the 3 gems that power it for quite some time, believing that such a power is best left to its own devices. But Andrias's bloodline didn't agree, dismissing them as cowardly. The girls conclude that if Anne can get powers from her connection with the stone, so can they.
Wait, do Marcy and I get cool anime powers too?
Yes, honey, you should all get cool anime powers.
But Andrias tricked them into giving them up when they repowered all the stones at the temples. Well, almost all the stones. Oh, fulfilled foreshadowing? Mother Olm tells Anne that as long as she has a connection to the stone, she can restore the gem's power to Sasha and Marcy if and when the time comes. She also mentions much later on that the prophecy isn't so much of an absolute as it is more a humble request for help, and that the 3 beings imbued with the gem's power are ultimately free to do whatever they wish with them, either to save the world from those who would pervert the gem's power for destruction, or to embrace the fall. The thing about those cool anime powers, though, is that they come with a heavy cost. We saw this in true colors when Anne could barely sustain her god mode for only a few minutes, and we get confirmation just how much of a toll it takes on her in the Season 3 premiere, where an even shorter time spent with a sliver of these powers renders her unconscious.
I'm thinking I shouldn't use those powers if I can help it. I don't know how else to describe it, but using them feels bad.
This is not only a clever way for the writers to not solve all of Anne's problems with her anime powers, but a great bit of lore building for the stones and the damage they can cause when used even out of a desire to do good. Such otherworldly items with the power to cleave rifts through hundreds upon thousands of universes. To misuse such a power would mean devastating consequences to their wielder, and even worse consequences to the multiverse at large. But of course, Andreas's family believe themselves to be above all that. Above the consequences of normal people, or frogs, for their actions. They have buried their heads so deep up their own buttholes that they genuinely love the smell of the rot inside, and genuinely believe that even the cosmic forces of nature should bow to their whims. That is why they will continue to destroy the fragile nature of not just their world, but all worlds. To hell with the consequences. And there will be serious consequences on all sides of the conflict. For no matter what side you're on, war will make corpses of us all. You might think this would be a great segue into the finale for how ominous that last sentence was, and you'd probably be right. But we're not doing that yet. Haha! Haha! Ha ha! I can't fake a laugh, I don't know why I'm trying. If you've seen the last Amphibia vid or my 2 videos covering the Owl House, then you know this little segment comes more towards the end of the video rather than, oh god, that much left? What am I doing? But considering this is Amphibia's final season, it would be a little weird to talk about the little things I enjoyed about it after going through the whole rigmarole of... So I'm gonna briefly, shut up, go a bit out of order from how I usually do things and talk about these little things now. As always, I'm gonna bounce around a lot of topics, so if you happen to be watching this video while you're doing other stuff, no judgment, I'll use this sound effect for when I switch topics. Alright, let's go. I covered most of the main cast in the last video I made, and much of my praise for them still rings true for Season 3. Though there are some newcomers and addendums I can make to some of my older praise. For one, everyone's comedic chops are still on point.
Eat the rich!
Do you hear the people sing, singing the song of angry men?
Paired with the same great timing from the animators that really accentuate the humor of some of these line deliveries.
I got this.
On the subject of Polly, I feel compelled to re-mention the fact that there's been a slight vocal evolution in Amanda Layton's performance. Even as she started to grow away from the more nasal voice from the earliest episodes, there is still a slight difference in her performance as Polly through Season 3 compared to Season 1, considering the fact that she's grown up a bit since we first met her. And it's always neat when an actor or voice director or any combination therein takes that into account.
I can't wait to abuse this power! Hello, sensory overload!
Sprig is a more blatant example of vocal evolution, due to Justin Felbinger being a little closer to his actual age than some of the other voice actors. So it wasn't so much an acting choice on his part as it was actual puberty.
Sorry, Polly, but me and Anne have changed. We're different now.
Some of us even sound different.
What? Nothing.
Still, comparing the voices of Season 1 Sprig with him in Season 3 is one of those things where it reflects just how much the character, and Felbinger himself, have aged since the show began, and reflects on the overall theme of change that drives the show. Heck, one episode in the first half of Season 3 has Sprig turn 11, generally around the age where puberty starts to take its magical and hideous hold on young boys everywhere. Oh, the Cronenbergian terror. Which also reflects on the theme of change, and that first major step on the crossroads between adolescence and adulthood. but I'm getting ahead of myself. Of the newcomers to this season, Mrs. Boone Choi's voice actress deserves special mention due to the fun and very cute fact that she's Matt Brawley's real-life mother, Awn Brawley. Okay, look, I tried to double check if that's how you pronounce her name, okay? I really did. Do you know how hard it is to look up how to pronounce Awn in Google or YouTube or anything like that? I tried, okay? I tried. And technically calling her a newcomer is a bit inaccurate considering she'd played Anne's mom a few times before in brief flashback cameos. But I was a little surprised that when the time came to increase her appearances, she wasn't replaced by a more recognizable name or someone with a bit more experience. And I won't lie, it was a bit uncanny hearing a clearly older woman's voice coming out of a character who looks late 30s to early 40s at best. And it sort of sounds like it took her a while to get really comfortable behind the microphone. Couldn't imagine. But it honestly didn't take me too long to get used to her at all. With the later knowledge that Mr. and Mrs. Boone Choi are actually first-generation immigrants from Thailand, Mrs. Brawley's hesitant English, where you can tell she's doing her best, but it isn't her first language, so she has to think a little harder about what she's saying, adds another layer of authenticity to this character, the same as Sprig or Polly. And sure, in voice acting, theoretically anybody could play anybody, but the added layer of authenticity goes a long way in selling the performance and the character as well. And sticking with Mrs. Brawley rather than replacing her with a younger actress or someone like that was ultimately for the best because I can't really imagine anyone else bringing Mrs. Boone Choi to life so effectively.
Wait, why is this one dressed like a doctor?
A mom can dream, can't she?
Why do I get the feeling I'm not living up to your expectations?
Complementing this is Brian Sunalath as Mr. Boone Choi.
I'm sitting here with Brian Sunalath.
Whom until literally as I was writing this, I did not know hails from Portland, Oregon. Like, maybe it's just my American ignorance speaking here, but I thought for sure the guy voicing Mr. B had to also be a native from Thailand.
Kick that robot's butt, you mean? Remember I was all wapow and you were like, choo, choo.
And while he is putting on an exaggerated accent, there is still that layer of authenticity owing to Sunalath having Southeast Asian ancestry on both his parents' sides. And unlike other characters where the actor is putting on an exaggerated voice, the voice itself is never used as a joke to make fun of Asian accents. All the humor of Mr. B comes from how much God has a personal vendetta against the man, and that's wonderful.
All right, one more hit and this 10-hour boss battle will finally be over.
I'll circle back to the Boone Chois a bit later, but with all the characters in the show, new and old, it's always a struggle to narrow my praise between acting prowess and character depth, and just listing off every voice actor I recognize saying, hee, I know them. In the case of the former, I have to give some special props to Keith David in particular, due to being an all-around badass, and for playing what is effectively the main antagonist of the show in a manner I wasn't expecting. Keith David is no stranger to playing villains. With a voice as deep and seductive as his, it's inevitable he'd notch a few baddies in his belt.
Evil.
But again, as I was expecting Andreas to shift into a more common villain role after True Colors, him being more or less the same big goofus was a welcome twist, and gave David a chance to keep showing his sillier side on top of being more villainous.
Oh, and look at this, nifty crown.
This also speaks to the quality of the writing for Andreas as a whole, but as some of his best moments are in the finale, I'll save any more praise I have for when we get to that. There is also RuPaul as Mr. X, who, look at this guy and look at this guy. Put them together and what do you think is gonna happen?
One popsicle, please.
Sorry, little man. This was the last one. Give me a sec.
But seriously, the way X is animated and the way RuPaul voices him, it's a comedy match made in heaven that honestly kind of makes me wonder if I haven't been missing out on a world of culture, having never seen RuPaul's Drag Race.
Now, what kind of man are you looking for?
If you've got a pulse, we'll do great.
Yeah.
My drier than Grant's, too.
And again, I could just go on listing off every voice actor and every celebrity guest they managed to bring in because there is seriously a lot of great talent here in Season 3 especially. Cree Summer, Anika Noni Rose, Kate Micucci. Really? That's how you pronounce it? I'm so sorry. Wallace Shawn, Wayne Knight, Brad Garrett, Jason Ritter, Cassandra Lee Morris, Zeno Robinson, Rachel House, Whoopi Goldberg. They got frickin' Whoopi Goldberg in this show? I love Whoopi Goldberg, despite, If you'll allow one specific moment of nerddom, though, I want to draw special attention to the voice actor for Andreas' father, Aldrich, William Houston. A name and voice I knew I recognized from somewhere, but couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. One quick IMDb search later, and holy crap, he's Vendrick! King Vendrick, aka the visual inspiration for Andreas' design! Didn't I say he reminded me of him in the last video?!
I f***ing knew it!
Yes, the reason I recognized Houston's voice was because he's had supporting roles in pretty much every From Software game in the past decade. From the first Dark Souls...
We are both strangers in this strange land, but at least now there are two of us.
To Bloodborne...
You there! Hunter! Didn't you see the warning? Turn back at once.
To Dark Souls 3...
You ignorant slaves. Finally taken notice, have you?
And to Elden Ring... Hey, what gives Miyazaki? His role as the tragically manipulated Vendrick in Dark Souls 2 is probably the most relevant to Amphibia, though, as he not only served as part of the visual inspiration for Andreas, but Andreas' backstory and manipulation from his father mirrors Vendrick's own doomed quest for conquest to appease someone who never truly valued him as an individual. So it's so fitting to have William Houston play this kind of character here, and speaks to what a huge nerd Brawley is for casting him. And from one Soulsborne nerd to another, I greatly appreciate it.
Why, son, I think I'm almost proud of you.
Circling back a bit to Anne's parents, I really want to emphasize what a joy it was to finally have them in a larger capacity for the first half of Season 3. They'd been teased throughout the last 2 seasons, either through flashbacks or just Anne talking about them, and her mom especially had built up the reputation for being a prototypical Asian mom who takes absolutely no guff.
I'll tell you what I need, what I really need!
You know what Mommy really needs? You, out of her kitchen.
But even for how strict her mom could be, Anne's tear-filled recollection of even her more annoying quirks, and just wanting to see this poor girl reunited with her folks, was one of the major reasons the promise of human world antics in Season 3 was so enticing. And when Anne finally does reunite with them, it's as emotionally cathartic as I hoped it would be.
Hi, Mom.
Brief but related tangent. I mentioned in the last video that I hadn't seen my own parents for about 1.5 years around the time I uploaded it, thanks to immigration complications and all the events that were going on. In the time since that video was released, I was actually able to visit my family for the first time since before the pandemic back in March last year, and my own long-awaited reunion was about as cathartic for my parents too. The dynamics between the Boonchoys and the rest of the cast are a huge part of what makes the first half of Season 3 so fun to watch. I've seen arguments split down the middle as to whether or not 3A or 3B is the superior half of the final season, but I don't think many are decrying the Boonchoys getting more time to shine either way. Especially since we barely got to know Mr. Boonchoy in the flashbacks or stories Anne would mention about them. And I don't really know what I was expecting, but this guy is such a grade A dork, I highly doubt your opinion to love anything if you don't love him.
The trick is to ease them into the world, slow and steady, like how I'm easing this egg into... Dang it!
It's also kind of a rarity to see the parents of the main character get this involved in the adventure. Most of the time in this kind of story, you'd have lengthy scenes of the protagonist trying to hide the oddity they're trying to protect. But the first episode of Season 3 does away with that trope fairly quickly.
And we're the planners, the lovable frog family Anne's told you all about.
Hop, that was not the signal!
And while Anne does still hide the complete truth from them, once they deal with Andreas' cloakbot, they're both pretty amped for whatever else is thrown their way.
Well, if anything comes up, we're ready. I even broke out the old pull-up bar. Look!
Oh, my back!
Honey, be careful.
To top all of that off, the fact that they're both clearly still in love and have a pretty healthy relationship is the icing on the cake. Despite their differing personalities and Mrs. Boonchoi's stricter parenting and opinions of Anne, she and her husband never have any huge arguments over it, and we never see them blaming each other for Anne disappearing, even though they both probably felt guilty enough as is. To see a complete family dynamic not just for Anne, but for the Planter kids as well, who never got to know their own parents, it provides all the warm fuzzies, wow, that felt gross to say, that Amphibia excels at.
Firstly, how dare you disobey me? Secondly, how dare you put Anne and yourself in danger? Thirdly, why are you smiling?
You're scolding me. Yep, you're family now, bud. Yay!
Already having second thoughts about this.
Speaking of gross, once the Planters return to Amphibia, Sprig and Ivy pick up where their relationship left off, being the cutest power couple in Wartwood, adored by all.
Not this again.
Ugh, young love is the worst.
While Ivy doesn't get a lot of opportunities to shine independently from her relationship with Sprig, the best compromise with that is to make the once fawning townsfolk absolutely sick to death of their lovey-dovey shtick. It's understandable too that they'd be a little crankier in the midst of the apocalypse, and less likely to abide cutesy stuff like this.
Whoa, Nelly!
Present! Shut up, Nelly.
From a viewer's perspective, I'm still very much happy to sail on the SS Sprivey. But this episode also delves into the important theme that you should be able to act independently from your partner, no matter how much you like each other. Indeed, when Sasha comes up with a plan to help a convoy of supplies get past a robot guard outpost while they change shifts.
Wait, the robots change shifts?
Everyone deserves a break, Loggle.
She pairs the inseparable Sprivey with Stumpy and Fern, respectively. While Sasha is pretty blunt that she couldn't care less about splitting them up, she states that it is for a tactical reason that will benefit their mission. Something the young pair elects to ignore as they trick their new partners into thinking Sasha changed up the plan. Of course, when shit does hit the fan, Sprivey learn the error of their saccharine ways and go back to Sasha's original idea, reflecting on their clinginess with a surprising amount of maturity for their age.
Hey, Sprig, I really like where our relationship is headed, but...
Maybe we shouldn't let it dictate every decision we make in our lives? Yep.
Wait, you guys are dating?
One of the things my wife and I decided at the very start of our relationship was that we never had to do absolutely everything together. And while I always enjoyed chatting with her online even before we dated, we both recognized that we had our own lives and things we needed to do while we long-distance dated. So there was never any expectation that we had to drop everything to the other person's whim, and the same is still true today. No matter how much you love your significant other, you still have to be your own person. And it's nice that these kids have figured that out so young. Just another example of young love that is handled with a lot more emotional maturity and thought than what you might expect from an average kids show. And that's pretty flippin' cool if I do say so myself.
What will I do without you?
I'll miss you every second. Good lord.
This show has had a healthy showcase of Thai culture ever since the early episodes of Season 1, and it's only gotten better in Season 3. The biggest example is in the aforementioned episode where the Boonchois and the Planters go to the Thai temple, and where Anne sees it as an almost chore. Her frog family takes an instant liking to it. With Sprig joining in a game of sepak takraw, Hop-podge taking part in con dancing, and Polly showing off her linguistic skills in Thai school.
You taken Thai before?
เปล่าแต่หนูดูละครไทยรักเบาสมองของคุณนายบุญช่วยทั้งหมดแล้ว Wow. Show off.
Again, it's not like Anne hates her own culture or anything. She's very proud to be Thai. It's just something she never really considered from an outside perspective, considering she's been going to the temple all her life. And before I watched this show, I can honestly say I didn't know that much about Thai culture, beyond what's been engraved in pop culture through the lens of, majority speaking, a revisionist Anglo perspective.
Getting to know you.
What? No, you were supposed to play the original. No, get it away. The entire Amphibia team's efforts in accurately depicting these elements of a truly fascinating group of people has always been much appreciated. And it's also great that they managed to poke a little fun with those kinds of white people who are a little too enthused about someone else's culture with the character of Ned, who obviously means well, but is probably a little too oblivious for his own good if he can't see the optics of parking his Thai-themed food truck in front of a legit Thai restaurant.
Huh? I don't, what do I do?
As I previously mentioned, during the Planters' extended stay in LA, Sprig celebrates his 11th birthday in true Wortwoodian style.
Froggy little birthday here, it's crystal clear you were born this happy time of year.
Ah, thanks, guys.
This humble ceremony for many returns isn't enough for Anne, though, who decides to take Sprig out for some birthday escapades Los Angeles style. She takes the Frog Kid all around the city to various real-life locales, trying to make this the absolute best birthday he's ever had, in part because she didn't even know it was his birthday in the first place. And while Sprig does have a great time, his satisfaction isn't quite to Anne's liking.
So, was it the best birthday you've ever had?
Oh, definitely top 3.
What?
Anne has always had a problem with going a little overboard when she's trying to live up to extreme expectations. So when she has her dad drop her and Sprig off to ride a hot air balloon, they end up commandeering it when the pilot says the high wind alert makes it too risky to fly, a mistake they immediately come to regret. You know, a similar thing happened to me once. You goddamn old Driscoll, stop blowing holes in my balloon! Though they managed to survive their near-death experience, Anne is a touch dismayed that she messed up Sprig's birthday so badly, and that she didn't even remember it in the first place. But Sprig manages to set her right.
You're my best friend because I love being with you, not because you know what day I was born. And this birthday isn't top 3 because of the crazy stuff we did. It's top 3 because we got to spend it together.
She tops off the escapades by giving Sprig a birthday present, a telescope with his name engraved on it. It's a super cute episode that illustrates what a strong bond these two have, and ends on a sweet and heartwarming note with no loose ends whatsoever.
Anne, come on! When is this balloon ride supposed to be over?
I'm a cat.
Hey, my shoe!
After that fabulous cat.
One thing I didn't really talk about in the last vid is how frickin' on point this show is in its references. Obviously, the crew's writers and animators wear their anime nerddom on their sleeves, but there's also little things like this cactar in the background of the mall, the little Kirby dance they do when they get Domino to the vet, and then there's this glorious bit.
I hate gravel. It's bumpy and bothersome, and it gets everywhere.
I love you. I still can't believe you guys like the prequels more.
Even when they get back to Amphibia, they still manage to slip in some fun little references that are all perfectly age-appropriate and not troubling in any capacity. What the f*** is this?
No, 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 no! Wait. Wait. Just wait!
I mentioned how flipping funny this show was in the last video, but it bears repeating here. This show is so flippin' funny. Even on multiple rewatches, I can't even count how many times I had to repeat a joke because I was laughing so hard.
Shut the gate! Shut the gate! Shut it!
Don't know why we thought that would work.
It's a credit to everyone from the writers, to the storyboarders, to the animators, to the voice cast that even a joke you can see coming a mile away still lands as hard as it does.
Well, Doc, I think you've done it. I think you've cured me of my fear of direct eye contact.
Holy shit, it's another f***ing day. It's the best day ever again. 'Cause I'm a stupid f***ing cat and I don't know shit. And I don't know what it is to be sad. I think I'll run around for no good reason and act like there's stuff I gotta do. I have no idea how much the world sucks 'cause I have no reference level.
One bit of representation that I felt worth addressing separate of the tie rep is all the casual LGBTQ+ characters we get throughout the Planters' time in Los Angeles. Be they incredibly minor,
no, Tyler, I will not clown face you.
Or more recurring, like the IT girlfriends who help Polly rebuild Frobo. While Amphibia's sister show, The Owl House, has managed to have some pretty phenomenal representation in the main cast, I don't think the more casual representation we get in Amphibia is anything to scoff at either. I mean, given pretty much everybody's suspicion as to why Owl House was really cut short, and Disney's sordid history of fair weather support of LGBTQ+ groups and interests besides, it's honestly a miracle we can get even a simple blush like this. Lest we forget how much Gravity Falls had to skirt around the censors with its own gay rep.
Please revise the action of Blubs putting his arm around Durland. As noted in previous concerns, their affectionate relationship should remain comical versus flirtatious.
Nope, they're buddies. Chill out.
There's a touch more I can say about the casual rep in this show, but as it pertains to events after the finale, stay tuned. Like I've said in some of my other videos, I'm not much of a music critique guy. The only way I really judge a song's quality is if I find it catchy or pretty. There's not much else to it. However, that doesn't mean I can't give a special shout out to Amphibia composer TJ Hill, who scored every season and every episode of the show from beginning to end. He's released a lot of his tracks on his YouTube channel in the past few years too. So if you want to hear some of the isolated tracks, and believe me, there's several bangers in the finale you will want to hear isolated from the other audio, you can check that out here. And I really hope YouTube doesn't get rid of that little card thingy anytime soon, or I just made myself look like a fool. Hey, whose side are you on? There's something incredibly nostalgic about whenever an old Disney Channel show would have a holiday-themed episode. Like how every Halloween you'd have all these themed episodes and movies and such to really get you into the spirit.
Well, we're in the main hall with a bunch of weenies.
Hall of Weenies?
And thus is born the holiday known as
Arbor Day!
So it was pretty fun that Amphibia had a Halloween-styled episode in its second season. But I was especially pumped when they announced a Christmas episode for Season 3. I frickin' love Christmas. And seeing Mrs. Boonchoy decorating her house to the nines in all things Xmas reminds me of Christmases at my house and how my mom would get super into it. No, seriously, we had so many ornaments we had to break them off into 7 separate trees scattered throughout the house. I am not even joking. One other thing Mrs. Boonchoy loves about Christmas is the parade that a lot of other restaurants and stores in the community take part in, and which she's always dreamed of being a part of herself. However, when she does get a call offering Tygo a place in the parade, she turns it down, saying it's better for them to not draw too much attention to themselves, with the FBI and King Andreas still after them. Anne says nuts to that and organizes the entire float behind her mom's back, enlisting the help of Dr. Jan and the IT girls to arrange the float and surprise her mom with it on Christmas Eve. Anne's mom is above overjoyed, stating that beyond just the free advertising the restaurant will get, being in this parade makes her truly feel a part of the community.
Ever since your father and I came here from Bangkok, it's been a challenge fitting in. I have always thought making it into this parade would mean we had finally done it.
That's not even the only great part of the episode. You also have Mr. Boonchoy trying to get a candid photo for this year's Christmas pic, the Planters trying to ask what the heck Christmas is about and getting more and more confused with each answer.
But many of our modern traditions come from the ancient Roman feast of Saturnalia. Of course, there's also the Dutch Sinterklaas.
Sprig trying to find the perfect gift for Anne that ends in the corniest but sweetest fashion.
It's you, 'cause, you know, you're my hero.
Thanks, dude.
And even if Anne's gift does eventually draw the attention of Andreas, they at least do it in the most f***ing hilarious way possible.
At this rate, it'll take a miracle to find Anne.
Woo! I'm Anne Boonchoy! I'm Anne Boonchoy! She's Anne Boonchoy!
Well, that was easy.
And to top it off, we get a wandering Rebecca Sugar singing a delightfully low-key carol about the various worldwide Christmas traditions. Really serving up those Moose Heart Garfunkel from Arthur vibes.
So how long has the singing guy been around?
What?
I thought he came here with you.
If you believe it's special, then that's what makes it special.
That was weird.
Yeah. Mom! There's a singing moose in front of the house!
It's sweet, it's festive, it's a bundle of joy in half an hour like all the great Christmas specials and episodes from all the shows I would watch around the holidays. It's also just a nice reflection of what this show is at its best. A cute little adventure romp with some great characters, hilarious comedy, a slight hint of danger for added excitement, and affirming messages about life, friendship, family, love, all that great stuff. Truly, Amphibia is one of those shows I will always think about when I think of good friends, good vibes, and comfort. Now, who's ready to get their heart torn out Temple of Doom style?
Hello, Film Freak here. Well, actually it's Film Freak speaking through a weird new AI feature Filmora has that does speech to text because I'm too lazy to record this disclaimer myself. I regret to inform you that the next portion of the video, talking about the final 2 episodes of Amphibia, were riddled with copyright claims from YouTube that, if left unfixed, would have resulted in a worldwide ban of the video. Naturally, I didn't care for that. So, for the remainder of the video, I'm afraid I've had to employ either some Ken Burns-style edits over still frames or put an anti-copyright filter over key scenes that would delay this video even more if I went back and properly fixed them. I'm sorry that the rest of the video will look dumb, especially during some emotional moments during the finale, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. Have I mentioned I hate YouTube and their broken-ass copyright claim system?
Kids, won't you step outside for a second?
Anyway, now that I've gotten that out of my system, enjoy the rest of the video. And don't use AI recordings of voice actors who never consented to having their voices used for random ass shit. No, this doesn't make me a hypocrite. This AI thingy was explicitly set up for dumb crap like this, but taking a professional's voice and having them say or do dumb crap like sing a Bo Burnham song, to name a hypothetical, is crass and callous to their profession. Furthermore, I'd like to talk about using the Rotten Tomatoes Toma meter as a legitimate form of judging a movie's quality. That's not how it works, you stupid
Yes, it's finally time. We're gonna talk about the final 3 episodes of Amphibia, the beginning of the end, All In, and The Hardest Thing, and basically treat them like one big finale movie. The moment the entire season, if not the entire show, was building up to ever since the 3 girls wandered into this strange and wondrous world. A world filled with beauty and horror, friends and enemies, hope and despair. All of which come together in the final clash between the frogs of Wartwood, the remains of the Toad insurgents, the newts of the forest, and the mechanical forces of King Andrias and the Core.
A battle of 4 armies. 1, 2, 3, yes, 4.
As such, if you've somehow watched this entire video up until this point and haven't seen the finale, or even the show, then I would strongly urge you to stop this video now and go watch it for yourself. Seriously, there's only so much a late 20-something-year-old can do justice to a feature-length finale by summarizing it. Go now, or forever hold your peace. I'm gonna assume you either left or have been asleep this entire time, so let's do this.
Here we go!
Long story short, after the frogs, newts and toads settle their differences at Anne's insistence, they come up with a plan to distract Andrias's forces with a full frontal assault, while a small team sneaks into the castle to take the box. A similar tactic used in one of Marcy's favorite movies, War of the Warlocks. Fittingly, the beginning of the end starts with a flashback of Marcy trying to show the girls said movie during a sleepover, where she enthusiastically regales her friends in forthcoming events.
Whoa! Spoiler alert! Sorry. It's just such a good movie and I get carried away.
Marmar, I'm joking. I don't actually care.
I've always appreciated the way Amphibia handles its flashbacks, ever since the beginning of Season 1. I've heard some arguments that this show should have opened with Anne's birthday escapades with Sasha, as it would have explained who the girls were and how they got to Amphibia more succinctly. But, with all due respect, you're wrong, I'm right. To put my perspective in less childish terms, opening with the planters and being introduced to Anne through the more outlandish Frog Kid also opened up a slew of questions regarding who Anne was, who her friends were, and how they all got stranded in this froggy world in the first place. And the small taste of seeing Anne stealing the music box at her friend's behest was the perfect hook to keep you invested about learning more. The flashbacks at the start of The Beginning of the End and All In are also great hooks, because we get to see just how far these girls have come through their time in Amphibia. The flashback in All In takes this even further, showing what the girls were up to just a day before all their adventure started. Hacking the PA system to blast their own music, letting loose a bunch of dogs and dancing in the halls, complete with a single moment of self-awareness from Anne that is casually dismissed by Marcy.
Hey, do you really think we should be doing this?
Of course! Unleash the puppers!
While the principal calls them all in for a talk, she's noticeably a little harder on Anne than she is with the other two, stating that while Marcy and Sasha have promising futures if they get their acts together, Anne is a bit more of a wayfarer, someone who doesn't take a lot of charge in her own life and does what others want her to. This lack of ambition, or even self-regard, drives the principal to give Anne some special attention, assigning her a personal essay.
Is she allowed to do that?
About what she wants to do with her life, and who she wants to be.
Oh, hey, isn't it your birthday tomorrow? Happy early birthday, Anne.
Comparing Anne or even Sasha in these flashbacks to who they are when we catch up with them in the present is night and day. Even while they're still unsure of what to think about Marcy, Anne owns up to the way they treated her and her interests so callously before, and how that might have played some role in Marcy's deception.
Remember that movie she used to make us watch? War of the Warlocks? And how we'd always fall asleep?
It was a 3-hour movie.
And I realize that it's pretty easy to take umbrage with Sasha having such a hard time moving past Marcy's selfish act, especially after she made such a big deal of everyone deserving a second chance in an earlier episode. On top of...
I think I've had enough of you, squeaky toy.
This isn't cute anymore. We're meeting up with Marcy right now. And discussion.
Sasha! Please! Stop this!
But we're almost there!
Sheesh, don't be a sore loser. Look, I'm gonna stay here and get this toad regime off the ground, but I can totally send you two home if you want.
It's crazy, and it's crazy. It's crazy, terrible. Oh my, get out of the way, please. It's burning, bursting into flames, and it's falling on the morning fast, and all the folks between it. This is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world.
Everything else that she's done. But to be fair, your emotions are always going to be a little muddier when someone you were really close to betrays your trust, which makes it harder for Sasha to forgive and forget so easily, even if she can recognize the irony. But as Anne points out, forgiveness isn't easy at all.
Forgiveness is hard, and it can take time. But believe me, it's worth it.
Still, this also leads to Sasha asking the important question of whether things can ever really go back to normal once the war is said and done. Acknowledging that while they may be better people now, their friendship wasn't exactly a healthy one. Before they can hash that out, though, there are bigger things to worry about. As Andreas and the Corps prepare to begin the invasion of Earth, and the frogs, newts and toads, arrive to draw his army's attention.
People of Amphibia, are we gonna sit here and let the past steal our future? No! Well then charge!
Now, me being practically raised on the Lord of the Rings movies means Freak loves him a good battle sequence. And while we do get some good snippets here and there, this is still an 11-minute segment, so we sadly don't get to see a whole lot of the battle on the ground level, in comparison to the A-Team sneaking through the castle. kind of a tease if I'm being honest.
My god, this is even bigger than the final battle in the Lord of the Rings movie! It's like 10 times bigger than that battle!
But hey, this is just the first part of the finale. We'll get some awesome action scenes yet, trust me. As it is, we do get a well-choreographed dance battle between a mind-controlled Yunnan and Olivia, and Anne and Sasha, bringing back that little DDR gag from the birthday escapades in a pretty unexpected way. I mean, it also gave a lot of fuel to the shippers out there, but...
T is for the trap. We won't go into that.
Once they break Olivia and Yunnan out of their mind control, the team proceeds to the throne room where the Calamity Box is being held. Suspiciously unguarded at that.
Wait, what? Hello, girl.
Yes, the three girls are finally back together again. But the Corps got some bad news for you, Sunshine. Marcy isn't well, she stayed back at the hotel. And she sent them along as a surrogate host they've effectively named Darcy.
Darcy?
Yeah, you know, like Dark Marcy. It's a reference to one of Marcy's favorite video games. We searched her memories, and the name appeals to us.
I'll be honest, I kind of wish this reintroduction/introduction was a little bit earlier in Season 3B. I mean, I understand why they held off for so long. They needed Darcy to be one step ahead of their sneak attack plan due to Marcy's knowledge of War of the Warlocks. But it draws back to that problem of hindsight and tone I mentioned earlier, in regards to the fun escapades Anne and the Planters were having while Sasha and Marcy were still stuck in Amphibia. While it certainly isn't all fun and games when the Planters return to Amphibia, there is still a more comedic bent that can be a bitter pill to swallow, if you're more concerned with the knowledge that the Corps has taken over Marcy's body and is using her as a meat shield for their inevitable meeting. It might have given the stakes a little more oomph to introduce this knowledge a little earlier, with the girls knowing that their friend is being possessed and having an even bigger sense of urgency to break into the castle and try to free her. Heck, you could even still do the same sneak attack plan, but with the girls hoping that Darcy hasn't been tapped into Marcy's memories or something like that. But again, that's just my own personal preference, and there is kind of a sick satisfaction as an audience member, knowing this plan probably isn't going to work thanks to the Corps having access to Marcy's brain, so I don't know, I'm not the boss. As it is, Darcy using their access to Marcy's memories to toy with the girls and bring up their poor treatment of each other, drives home the conflicted feelings Anne and Sasha share as to the future of their friendship. And one of the core themes of the finale as a whole, but we'll get to that in a bit. With the A-Team captured, the Resistance's armies retreat, and Darcy opts to put an end to any further meddling by severing Anne's connection to the Calamity Box themselves. Permanently.
Just a quick question. Are you sure this will return the stone's power to the box? What if killing me somehow extinguishes the box's power altogether? Poof!
This quick thinking is enough to keep her alive just a bit longer, but lands them all in prison as the invasion begins proper.
Primates of Earth, we have arrived! Hello, Earth! Congratulations on being conquered!
The team is able to escape with the help of Frobo, but Andreas' army soon wreaks havoc in LA, with the US military scrambling to join the multi-dimensional war as the de facto fifth and final army.
5 armies now?
The A-Team are quickly joined by some familiar faces, as Mr. X has recruited Anne's parents after they told him of the coming invasion, training them to kick all kinds of ass in preparation for this day. They all regroup at the girls' middle school, where they feed and arm themselves. Frobo gets a much-needed upgrade, and they all come up with a battle plan to get back into the castle and free Marcy from the Corps' control. All while Sprig casually mentions to Hop-podge he just wants the whole thing to be over with so things can get back to normal faster.
Normal? Yeah, you know, Ann and us just hanging out. Monster of the Week stuff, yada yada.
So as the Planters, Anne, her parents, and Mr. X face off against Andreas' army, Sasha, Grime, Yunnan, and Olivia sneak through the castle's force field to have another go at a sneak attack. And thankfully this time we get a lot more of that wanton destruction and pew-pew battle action that my little monkey brain craves so much. Naturally, there are a lot of names we can credit on this show, and to name and properly credit them all would make this stupidly long video even stupidly longer. But I do want to give special shout out to the storyboarders of this madcap, action-filled battle royale. Alphabetically, Hannah Ayubi, Inbal Breda, Danny Ducker, Alex Swanson, Eddie West, and Cassie Swart. Trying to pore through old Twitter posts around the time this episode came out and put an exact name to an exact scene was a Herculean effort my neurodivergent brain couldn't really handle, especially when this video is overdue as it is. But I will try and give some exact credit where I'm 90% positive they fit. In the case of a lot of the ground battle segments, I have to point out this cut moment that Danny Ducker boarded, where Mr. Boonchoi slips a smooch on his wife before they charge back into battle. Why they cut this, I have no idea, but we are all the worse for it. Brawley pointed out in an interview after the fact that this episode also consisted of 3 standoff moments between the major characters and their main adversaries, so to speak. The first of which is the fateful encounter between the planters and 2 giant herons under Andreas's mind control.
Those aren't just any giant herons. Those are the giant herons.
You mean those 2
attacked our parents?
Being honest again, this reunion between the planters and their greatest fear is sort of underwhelming compared to the other face-offs we have in this episode. Mainly because we've never actually seen these 2 herons before this point, besides a brief flashback when Hop-Pop told Anne what happened to Sprig and Polly's parents. For the longest time, I thought the 2 heron we saw in the Toad Tower episode were the same herons who attacked Wartwood. But no, they ended up being completely different. So them being brought back for the finale, where we've never really seen them patrolling Frog Valley or causing mischief somewhere else, kind of made their sudden reappearance feel unearned. Even if we got some other encounters between the planters and different herons to drive home their fear, apart from this brief gag earlier in the season anyway. It might have made this confrontation feel a bit more natural. As it is, it almost feels like they were thrown in as an afterthought to give the planters something to do. Though to be fair, their panic attacks at the mere sight of the herons are very well handled. I don't know what it is about depictions of panic attacks in animation lately, but they've kind of been on point. What eventually snaps the planters out of their inaction is seeing Mr. and Mrs. Boonchoi in danger, nearly eaten by the giant herons before they're able to bring them down with Frobo's help, and using the planter family hunting dance to sway them to their side.
Anne? What are they doing?
The planter family hunting dance!
Again, this whole encounter probably could have been done better with a bit more build-up, but it's not terrible by any means. There's practically nothing in this show I would say is terrible.
This has gone on long enough. Get out there and bring me that Boonchoi girl. Break her legs if you have to.
Well, unintentionally terrible anyway. While Darcy commands their army from the castle in the air. No, not that one. No, not that one either. That's not even oh, forget it. We get glimpses deep into their host's mind, where we see that Marcy has been occupying her time solving puzzles ad nauseum, until she remembers there's something that she was probably supposed to be doing. Leaving the room and entering a big-ass library, she soon encounters Aldrich, who presents her with the ultimate fantasy she wanted to escape to, complete with Anne and Sasha, who arrive to join her on her adventures. With the promise of an endless world and countless quests in store, the young girl has trouble deciding where to even start.
Whatever you want, Marmar. We only want what you want.
This is where Marcy's own maturity is tested. While I briefly discussed the vision of Anne and Sasha spitefully telling Marcy that they wanted nothing to do with her, that was only the warm-up to her true test of character. How she would react when her friends really did go along with everything she desired unquestionably. Marcy understands that no matter how much she may want it, the real Anne and Sasha would never go along with what she wants so easily, because they're their own people. And the last time she assumed they'd go along with her escapism, she nearly lost them completely. This allows her to reject Aldrich's fantasy, and defy the old king to his face, to which he responds by leaving her in darkness. Her test passed. All she can do now is wait for her friends to sort out the rest. Sasha intends to do just that, with her and Grime separating from Yunnan and Olivia as they hold off more cloakbots.
I'm glad you're with me, General. Likewise, milady.
And while Andreas joins the battlefield to give a challenge to Anne personally, Darcy stays behind to command the armies, leading to the inevitable confrontation between two master manipulators.
You really think you can manipulate the queen of manipulation?
Thank you, Grime.
Sorry.
Rewinding the clock a bit, in the episode Commander Anne, Sasha almost immediately defers leadership of the resistance to Anne, who, despite being no slouch when it comes to fighting, has never been much of a strategist.
Everyone, attack!
What kind of attack?
Just whatever feels right!
Sasha, meanwhile, is shown to have come up with a lot of attack plans and formations based on the attributes of each citizen of Wortwood. Yet she still refuses to take back command, even when things go really south for them. When Anne eventually asks why she's so adamant on not being commander, she has a pretty straightforward response.
Because the last time I was in charge, I ruined our friendship.
Putting on my smart video essayist big boy pants for a second. Oh jeez, why are they so tight? Suck it in, suck it in. There's an old quote from Plato, that may or may not actually be from Plato, that says, "Only those who do not seek power are qualified to hold it." And Sasha's character development fits that quote to a T. Not too long ago, she and the Corps held some pretty similar beliefs. That they knew what was best for everyone else, and more importantly, that might makes right. But seeing the utter contempt in one of her oldest friends, even when she was trying to set things right in the middle of her coup, woke Sasha up to just how backwards that train of thought really is. Stepping up as the commander of the resistance, not because she wanted to be in charge of an army again, but because she was the most qualified for the job along with Grime at the time. Fully expecting to relinquish that power to Anne, to rid herself of any temptation her position might have. But Anne more or less paraphrases that Plato quote by the end of that episode.
Sasha, not too long ago, you would have fought to keep the helmet. The fact you don't want it now proves you've changed.
Yeah, maybe.
Even with that reassurance, she still has doubts about herself. And with Darcy throwing all of her and Anne's mistakes back in their faces, she can't help but wonder before the battle if they can truly beat the Corps since it knows so much about them. To which Anne replies that they only knew the Sasha and Anne from Marcy's memories, and they've both grown a lot more since that fateful day in Utopia when they were all together last. Still, the confrontation between Darcy and Sasha ends up being more of a psychological battle of wills, where Sasha still struggles with all the terrible things she's done and the way she manipulated her supposed friends to get what she wanted. The Corps knowing exactly which buttons to press to get her vulnerable and helpless.
Sasha!
Darcy is gracious enough to not slaughter Sasha and Grime while they have a tender moment, where through a pained voice, Grime tells Sasha that before they met, he was just a bully in a tower, but she brought out the best in him by, ironically, feeding into some of his more negative traits. When she told him to butter up his troops so they wouldn't, quote, keep being useless, and encouraged his plan to stage a coup on Utopia, they both had pretty terrible reasons to do these plans, and hurt a lot of people to accomplish them. But if they hadn't bonded as they had, with Sasha acting as his cheerleader and confidant, then he would never have been convinced to join an actual worthy cause of fighting against Andreas in the first place, and get the chance to be an actual hero that fought for a truly better world, rather than placing himself on top and damning everyone else. Through some of her worst moments that no one holds in more shame than she does, she was still able to forge a lifelong bond with Grime that has helped them both come to a form of redemption. And this inspires her to keep fighting in turn, even when it seems all hope is lost. As this happens, Anne confronts her own Black Mirror in Andreas, who says he'll call the whole invasion off if she can beat him in single combat. which the odds seem slightly stacked in his favor considering he's riding around in a new fancy mecha suit. But she does have her calamity powers, which the planters warn her not to use, stating that Andreas knows they don't last very long and is setting her up for a trap. Anne thinks back to the essay the principal wanted her to write, and also thinks back to who she was before she met Sprig and the others.
Before I ended up in Amphibia, I didn't care about right or wrong. I just did what was easy. I let people walk all over me. And I think that's because I didn't love myself. Not really. But meeting you three has changed all of that. And these months we've spent together have shown me the person I really want to be. Trap or not, I have to do this.
This inspires her to take the fight to Andreas. And while she's able to keep up fairly well with the help of her powers, if you've played Dissidia, you know firsthand what a tough boss Keith David can be.
Watch in awe, pathetic pawn! Take this! Drown in your dreams! Cease to exist!
Still, she's able to inflict some emotional damage when she tells Andreas she pities him for what he's become.
1,000 years of suffering, of burying your feelings, of hating yourself. That must have been hard.
As Anne's powers start to fade, her family sends her a video message of encouragement, while Mr. X blasts some copyright-unfriendly K-pop that really shifts this anime shit into high gear.
Well, hello there, sweet life giving K-pop.
This sequence was thought up by frequent episode director Jen Strickland, Matt Brawley himself, and one of the show's animatic editors, Andrew Sorsini. Combined with a real-life K-pop song by the band Blackpink, it makes the fight between Anne and Andreas, interspersed with the fight between Sasha and Darcy, feel that much more epic. Like I keep saying, everyone who works in animation today is a huge anime dork, and we are feasting like royalty because of it. But even with this boost that nearly brings Andreas to his knees, Anne's powers still don't last very long. And when they start to fade again, Sprig frantically thinks of what he can do to help, inadvertently dropping a red envelope he picked up from a secret room in his family basement a few episodes prior. And if it feels like I brought that up out of nowhere just now, well, that's your sign you should have watched the show first. I warned you. Mr. X is able to see a secret code left for Andreas through his high-tech glasses, which Sprig borrows before flying up to deliver a message 1,000 years in the waiting.
Stop! I have a message from Leaf!
In her final letter to her oldest friend, she apologizes for how things ended between them, but holds no regrets for keeping the box's power away from those who would use it for evil. Knowing that she could never return to Newtopia, she settled in a small farming town, assuming a new identity and starting a simple farming life, stating that while the change was scary, it ended up being the best thing that ever happened to her.
So I'm begging you, my dearest friend, don't close yourself off. Open your heart and follow it.
With love always, your Leaf.
The years of denying his emotions finally catch up to Andreas when Sprig finishes the letter. Shocked and dismayed that he held on to such contempt for her when she never felt the same. Driven to tears, he laments this revelation had to come now, when he knows he's too far gone to truly atone for everything he's done. And Keith David's entire heartbreaking performance here proves why he's one of the greats.
But you're too late. The things I've done, the pain I've caused, there's no going back!
Darcy is alerted to Andreas' sorrow just as they're about to kill Sasha, telling him to get back on his feet and fight, which in turn gives Sasha the chance she needs to prove to everyone, mostly herself, that she isn't the same manipulator she was before.
I am not that person anymore.
Anne uses the last of her powers to charge at Andreas full force. But rather than fight back, he takes Leaf's advice, opening himself up to others for the first time in centuries. The war is won. With the core's connection severed and Andreas in shambles,
Living for 1,000 years was not without sacrifice.
The girls attend to Marcy, unconscious and immobile.
Oh, Marcy. We love you and we forgive you.
Anne? Sasha?
Marcy? Marcy!
So, all's well that ends well. The girls and the planters bid their goodbyes to the Boonchoys for the time being, returning the castle to Amphibia to sort out the rest of the damage and put a nice bow on everything after a high-octane battle. With the core long gone, all that's left is to have a nice little farewell tour, saying goodbyes and riding off into that glorious sunset. Hey, why is the moon getting closer? You'd be forgiven for thinking after such an intense 48-minute spectacle that the final episode of Amphibia would be more of a victory lap, resolving any loose ends in regards to smaller character moments. But nope. Turns out the core had one last trick up its, helmet, eyeball, bleh. Returning to Amphibia in secret, the core blasts off to the moon where it deploys its final protocol, activating the frickin' moon itself to crash into the surface of the planet, exterminating all life if they can't hoard the stone's power for themselves.
So what you're saying is, this thing's a giant sore loser!
More or less.
Mother Olm arrives to tell the girls that they can still fulfill the prophecy with their connections to the stones, but only if they choose to, stating that using that much of the stone's energy could depower them entirely, stranding them in Amphibia permanently. So she reiterates that the prophecy isn't an absolute guarantee. It hinges on the ultimate decision of the three girls, and whether they will fight or embrace the fall.
You call that a choice?
Of course we'll help! There's no way we'd leave you hanging in your hour of need.
Before leaving them to face their ultimate battle, Mother Olm instructs Anne that should the need arise, there's a secret spell she can use that will call upon the power of all three stones at once, but at the ultimate price of whoever uses it.
The spell. How do I use it?
My child, you have only but to ask.
Going back to the box, they meet Valeria in her requisite once-per-season appearance, who instructs them on how they can reconnect with the energy of the stones by thinking of all the people and places in Amphibia that they cherish and want to protect.
This will allow the stones to resonate with your hearts once again!
All this schmaltz grants the trio their true cool anime powers, which they use to go kick some evil moon butt.
Incoming targets. Deploy defenses.
Huh. Monsters on the moon. Final Fantasy VIII was right. So the true final battle begins, and if you thought the last episode was the peak of this show's anime influence, you ain't seen nothing yet. This entire sequence was storyboarded by Andrew Applegate, with the final animation done by Seiram Animation, a Korean animation studio that has been animating cartoons since the late 80s. Their first credited work was for the frickin' 7th through 9th seasons of The Smurfs. These guys have really been around the block. Along with Rough Draft Korea and Sunmin Image Pictures, they've been animating various episodes of Amphibia since the beginning, and the entire team are listed in full during the credits of The Hardest Thing, a rarity in Western cartoon credits. Proper credit is always appreciated regardless of the context. But after seeing Anne, Sasha, and Marcy test out their full powers that fit with their special interests and motifs, they damn well better have received proper named credit for this.
This is the coolest, most anime thing that's ever happened to me.
Still, the core isn't going down without a fight, and even goes so far as to plead with Andreas to help them in exchange for immortality. Resigned, Andreas sends the last of his robots up to the moon, where he at last begins to make up for what he's done by commanding them to help the girls delay the fall for as long as possible.
What are you doing?
Something I should have done a long time ago. Standing up to you!
I love a good callback! But even with their combined efforts, The core proves far too powerful and far too desperate to give up now.
Fools! You cannot stop a dart!
With the gem's power fading, Anne tells the other girls about the spell Mother Olm said she could use if their need was dire, admitting that it will probably kill her in the process. They reluctantly transfer their powers to Anne, filling the others in on her choice when they land on the surface. Sprig flies Frobo up to the moon in a desperate attempt to stop her. And if you're wondering how they can all breathe in space, the answer is quite simple.
Goodbye, moon! I'll see you next June! Cause I'm looking for a student! Carl! Enough with the song!
Pleading with Anne that he doesn't know what he'll do if she's gone.
Please don't do this! Don't go! I don't know what I'll do without you!
It's easy to forget sometimes how young Sprig is in this show. He's only 11 years old at this point, and even though he's lost his parents, they died at an early enough age where he didn't really have to process that loss when it happened, or at least doesn't remember how he processed it. Everything else in his life after that has been largely the same. Every day spent on the farm, getting up to hijinks with Polly or Ivy. The biggest shakeup happening when Anne stumbled into his life. And though she was a major change, it's come to a point where Sprig can't really imagine everyday life without her. She's become much more than just his best friend. She's a big sister, an inspiration. She's his hero. So when Sprig talked about wanting things to go back to normal during the battle for LA, he couldn't really fathom the idea of ever being truly separate from Anne in any capacity. Sure, they'd have to go their own ways, but it's like Anne said in Utopia before the coup happened. There'd always be a way to meet back up again. Right?
Some things are bound to change. They always do.
Oh, Hop-Pop, nothing will change. Anne will always be a big part of my life.
Of course she will.
But Sprig is also far removed from the selfish little frog who wanted to hoard Hop-Pop all to himself when his new girlfriend was inadvertently taking up all his time. And a small part of him does recognize when the smoke is cleared from the battle, that he may have to accept that Anne won't be an everyday part of his life the way she has been for the past few months. But that small, selfish part of him can't help but plead with her to stay anyway.
You changed my life.
And you've changed mine.
This shared confirmation is enough for Sprig to do the hardest thing and let Anne go. And with the full power of all three gems, the core is easily destroyed, wiping out the last remnants of an archaic and colonialist society for good.
So long.
So I guess the moon is just gone now, huh? Guess they're just gonna have to get used to that. In the aftermath, Sprig takes a barely alive Anne back to the surface, where she says her goodbyes to them all, with the satisfaction that she's kept them safe.
My only regret is that I never got to see Lovejoy's too.
Fading away like leaves on the wind, Anne Boonchoy completes the ultimate sacrifice. The hardest thing she's ever had to do, yet the easiest choice she could have ever made. But the story doesn't end there. Awakening outside of a strange little house, when she goes inside, she sees pictures and items with deep significance to her, and a message on a 90s-style computer asking if she'd like to talk, before it assumes a better form for her.
So much better. Come here, you!
Hey, none of that.
This creature, the Guardian of the Stones, calls himself a longtime watcher of Anne's exploits.
I'm not in the demographic, though.
Though Anne has a multitude of questions, not the least of which if she actually died, the Guardian assures her that all her inquiries shall be answered, and that yes, she technically did die, but they created a backup copy with all her thoughts and memories intact just before her expiration.
Well,
That's gonna cause some serious existential dread later on.
The Guardian is something of a curveball in terms of the overall lore of the show. It's sort of like the lion turtles from Avatar: The Last Airbender, where one kind of shows up in the finale and gives Aang the power he needs to end things the way he wants to. But at least in the Lion Turtles case, that was teased all the way back in the library episode halfway through Season 2. Here, the Guardian isn't really foreshadowed at all, save for a throwaway line Anne says while goofed up on painkillers.
Listen, Domino is not just a cat. She's the Alpha and Omega, an interdimensional being beyond all time and space.
Well, what's that now?
So I don't really blame anyone for thinking their sudden appearance feels like a cop-out, so they could kill off Anne and then bring her back with no consequences. But I think what puts me in the Guardian's corner overall is that there are still consequences. Anne freaking died. And like she said, knowing she's a copy created on the whim of an almighty deific figure is probably gonna stick with her for the rest of her life. Which leads to the Guardian's own question for Anne. Will she take up the mantle of Guardian in their stead?
I created the stones to see how mortals would handle unlimited power. Would you believe after about 10,000 years, you're the only individual who used that power for good?
While a generous offer, I guess, once Anne knows for sure the Guardian won't force her to do it, she politely declines, saying she'd rather have a lifetime to make more mistakes and figure more about herself than take up the role now and mess up the already fragile fabric of the multiverse. The Guardian, while initially annoyed, accepts her answer, sending her back to live a life to its fullest.
Go! Live your life! I've waited thousands of years to retire! What's 78 years more?
Wait, are you saying that in 78 years I'm gonna...
And so Anne is back from the dead, reuniting with all her loved ones as they celebrate their victory, with the Guardian leaving Anne one final gift, a sliver of the 3 gemstones, with enough power to send them on a one-way trip back to Earth. Now all that's left is to do the real hardest thing. Say goodbye. The ending of a story is never an easy accomplishment. No matter how many loose ends you remember to tie up, there's always going to be one loose strand that gets away from you. No matter what fate you come up with for your characters, there will always be those who claimed they deserved better, or worse. I think nowhere was that more apparent than when the first few reactions of the Amphibia finale came from the fans. There were those who acclaimed it as a fitting finale to a beloved show, and those who stated it was a betrayal to the themes and characters that the show claimed to espouse. There are those who wanted more concrete answers on certain topics, or felt like the answers to their questions weren't especially fulfilled. No matter the ending, you'll never completely satisfy everybody. And any answers that you can conceive as a creator won't always translate to the audience's satisfaction.
Now think about it. Imagine your favorite TV show. You've been through it all, the ups, the downs, the crazy coincidences, and then bang! They tell you what it's all about. Would you be happy? Does it make sense? How come it all ended in a church?
But that is the nature of endings in a nutshell. They'll never truly satisfy everybody, especially in regards to a story that you kind of don't want to see end to begin with. The biggest complaint I could see by far was the final goodbyes between the 3 girls and all the major character groups they bonded with. Not so much in the execution, but more so in the finality. First, we see Marcy's farewell to Yunnan and Olivia, stating that she wishes she got to know them a little better. But they respond that she still managed to change their lives for the better in the brief time they did know each other, forging a new relationship through their experiences together. She also bids farewell to Andreas, an act of extreme generosity that you can tell the old king wasn't expecting after everything he did to her, but means the world to him.
Goodbye, Andreas.
Take care, kiddo.
Next, we have Sasha and Grime, with the latter giving the former a stoic lieutenant's goodbye, a very formal and unaffected adieu.
I'm gonna miss you so much!
Not as much as I'm gonna miss you.
Then we see our original frog family, Anne wishing all of them individual goodbyes in turn. First Polly, calling her the little sister she never knew she needed.
I know you're gonna grow into an amazing frog and take over the world.
Without you as my moral compass, I definitely will.
Then to Hop-Pop, saying she'll always cherish being a planter.
If you ever need a home-cooked meal or your old room back, just stop by.
And finally to Sprig, the first connection she made while in Amphibia, and the first person to see the value in her that even she couldn't see in herself. The amazing frog boy who, through it all, thick and thin, stood by her side when no one else would, taking on the entire world together as true companions, in this world and every other.
Nothing will ever change how much you mean to me. Not time or space or being worlds apart.
Spran against the world.
Spran against the world.
With one last curtain call, the girls open the portal to Earth and step inside. But not before one last hug between the two friends who started it all. This absolutely beautiful shot was animated by Hyun-Min Lee, an animator who has worked on many of Disney's recent animated features ever since The Princess and the Frog, where she mainly animated a number of Louis the Alligator's scenes, as well as the stylized moments in Almost There. Here she gives this 360 camera spin all the emotional resonance and grace of James Baxter's animation in the Steven Universe finale.
Hey, don't you mean Sally Galaxy?
Oh, shut up, don't milk it. It's a fitting and tragically gorgeous send-off to Anne and Sprig's friendship, as she steps into the portal that closes behind her, the box crumbling to ashes once it does. Several months pass, and life in Amphibia is slowly returning to normal. The vegetation has returned, helped in part by Andreas himself, who is noticeably more haggard and wrapped in chains, implying that he didn't get off with just a slap on the wrist for all his crimes. Still, the chains seem to be wrapped around him of his own volition, not like his cronies back there anyway, and he spends his time adorned with artifacts that remind him of his old friends. Beryl's hammer, Leaf's brooch, and the little robot Marcy pinned on his robe when they first met. You can even see signs of his extreme age catching up to him, implying that he doesn't have much time left in this world. It's a bittersweet yet ultimately hopeful ending for his character. Not redeemed or even forgiven by everyone else, but not abandoned to the wild to expire in anonymity either. He has just enough time to make even a little right what he made wrong, and for now, that's enough. In town, we see the frogs getting ready for some kind of ceremony, where a grown-up Polly races back to the planter farm, as we see what all our favorite froggy citizens are up to.
Hurry up, Boggle! It's almost time for the unveiling!
I never should have taken that cheat day.
We also see the visiting dignitaries, Grime, Yunin, and Olivia, with the latter commenting on the appeal of settling down in a nice farm town like this, and raising a family.
And it's far away from the countless enemies I made when I was General Yunan, Scourge of the Sand Wars, defeater of Ragnar the Wretched.
I know, sweetheart. We all know.
Back at the farm, Polly tells everyone that the ceremony is about to start, an unveiling of the town's latest statue of their greatest hero. I'm assuming somewhere Sasha and Marcy get their own statues too, but let's not make a whole Legend of Korra debacle over this. Where is Katara's goddamn statue, you Philistines? Ivy shows up to enthusiastically tell Sprig about the discovery of a completely unexplored continent somewhere in the Amphibian Sea, eagerly asking if he's ready for another adventure.
I'm in.
Fast forward 10 years later in Los Angeles. Marcy arrives at the airport, picked up by Sasha as they drive and fill each other in on their lives. The strategic bisexual pride sticker on the rearview mirror, confirming what we all basically knew already about Sasha. I mean, come on. When Marcy asks about Sasha and Anne, the former states that they did hang out a little after Marcy moved out of state, but that they kind of drifted apart as the years went on.
We kind of fell into different friend groups in high school. We still talked, but only every once in a while.
And this is where fan opinions split even more, with some praising the poignancy of such a statement, while others were quick to decry that these three would ever drift apart, after experiencing something so intense as saving the multiverse together. But that's the thing. They drifted apart, yes, but they also came back together, as this epilogue clearly shows. It's like if people complained about Frodo leaving for the Grey Havens and never seeing Sam again, without knowing they reunited decades later when Sam left on the last boat to the Undying Lands, as stated in Appendix B of The Return of the King.
Read a book, people!
Joking aside, I do understand the upset reaction people had to this line, as I also understand those who lament Anne's separation from the Planters with no confirmed way, as of yet, of ever seeing them again. With how much emphasis the show put on found families and friendship, it can almost feel like they did a complete 180 in the decision to not leave you with even a smidgen of confirmation that these characters could ever reunite. But to me, that's ultimately what makes this ending work so well. I wasn't much of a socializer in my school years. I mean, I had friends eventually, sure, and I cherish my memories with them every day. But I also never really hung out with them after school either. I can count the instances when I did on one hand. I don't know if this made me a really good friend in hindsight, but it's just the way I've always been, keeping my home and social life more or less separate outside of family, even if unintentionally. And I remember one time during one of the last days of senior year, as a friend I'd known through all of high school and I were walking down the hallway together. We kind of stopped after a certain point where our paths diverged and he said, "Well, bye, probably never gonna see you again." I told him not to talk like that. Of course we'd see each other again. This was over a decade ago. And while I kept in some contact with him on Facebook and still have him as a friend on there, that really was the last time we've seen each other in person to this day. There's a great number of friends from high school that I haven't seen in person in years, especially after I moved to an entirely different country. And the few times I've managed to go back to my hometown, I haven't exactly made the effort to reconnect with anyone in person. And I don't mean it out of malice or apathy, not at all. I'm just not a very sociable person. I mean, I make multi-hour videos about children's cartoons. Does it look like I go out much? So the longer I'm removed from high school, nearly 11 years on at this point, the longer I've gone without seeing some of the familiar faces I used to hang out with every day, some of whom are, regrettably, not even alive anymore. Still, I don't regret the connections I made with them, for my part, even if they were small or kind of superficial. While I look back on those times and feel my brain trying to dig itself further into my skull to escape the cringe, that never has anything to do with the friends that I had. Though I haven't seen them in ages, I still think of them every so often. And if they think of me too, if they don't forget me, then our hearts will be one. Oh god, I just quoted Kingdom Hearts unironically. Oh, there goes the brain again! To call back to what was originally gonna be a throwaway gag, there's a line in the show Bluey that perfectly sums up this feeling of the sort of friends who don't really stay in your lives for very long, owing to extenuating circumstances or just the passage of time.
Sometimes special people come into our lives, stay for a bit, and then they have to go.
But that's sad.
It is. But the bit where they were here was happy, wasn't it? Maybe that makes it all worth it.
Indeed, as we finally catch up with Anne and see where her life has led her after finally figuring out who she is, we see that her career is much different than what the girl we first met in the swamp would have chosen. As a herpetologist, Dr. Anne Boonchoy tells a group of kids about different types of frogs, calling special attention to one in particular.
I named him Sprig, after a dear, dear friend of mine.
As Anne and the girls meet, all together again for the first time in probably many years, we see how easily they reconnect as if no time at all has passed, giving hope that no matter the distance or time, true friendships will never die. Will they eventually make their way back to Amphibia? I'd like to think so. Perhaps one of these days we might get a special spin-off or movie exploring just such a thing. But for now, we're left to fill in that question for ourselves, as all the most poignant endings do. In fact, I often think of the ending to a series of unfortunate events in regards to such open-ended conclusions. Now, the movie and the Netflix show fill in a lot of gaps that the books left intentionally blank. And that's fine enough for those adaptations. But the books themselves never really dive into the many burning questions fans had for many years. Who killed the Baudelaire parents? Why did the schism really happen? What even was in the sugar bowl to begin with?
Sugar.
Again, answers don't always bring you satisfaction. And sometimes it's much more effective to let the reader or audience member fill in these holes for themselves. In the final book of the series, there's a line near the end of the end that spoke to me as I looked to it for inspiration in this video. Not just in regards to Amphibia's ending, but to the nature of endings as a whole. It is not the whole story, of course, but it is enough. Under the circumstances, it is the best for which you can hope.
So, first I want to get into a little bit of the core inspiration for the project. So, that's me. That's my mom. My mother is Thai, and every summer she would take me to Bangkok, Thailand for these summer trips. And as an American kid, I grew up in Sacramento, California. I was very much a fish out of water every time she'd bring me. I don't know who's been to Bangkok before in this room, but it is a very, very different place. The humidity, right when you get off the airplane, it hits you like a brick wall. No joke. The food is incredibly spicy. I am very bad at eating spicy food, which is very embarrassing for a Thai person.
It's true.
The language, my cousins all speaking Thai, didn't speak very much English. You know what I mean? As a kid, going there really was like being transported to a completely different world. So, when I was looking to start my own show, looking for inspiration, I looked back on those days and this kind of magical experience that would happen without fail, where I would arrive in Bangkok, I would be very unsure of myself and very uncomfortable. But by the end of the trip, I didn't want to leave. It was a little bit like magic. It was this transformation that happened every year. I was looking to bottle up that sensation and make a show out of it about this character who lands in this very unfamiliar environment, in Anne's case, a completely different world, and slowly but surely, she grows accustomed to it, you know what I mean? It grows on her, you can say.
This show has always been about something very specific, which is the ebb and flow of friendship. You know what I mean? So you start together, and you grow apart, and you learn and you grow independently, and you find each other again, and now you're all a little bit different, and what does that mean for the friendship moving forward? I think that the show has always been about that. You have these three girls who are very tight, and then they get dropped into this medieval Lord of the Rings-y fantasy rigmarole, but they're separated, right? And so they have their individual adventures, and then they come back together, and they're all a little bit different. So that theme is throughout the show, and it's in the conclusion of the story, which is really the ebb and flow and the changes of friendship. You know what I mean? It's the changing nature of friendship, really. For me, this episode was so emotional because Anne saying goodbye to the planters and Amphibia was happening at the exact same time that I was saying goodbye to Anne and the planters and Amphibia. And for me, it's one of those things where like, oh man, this is actually making me emotional. I can't believe it. Anne believes
in the end that she will see them again. She has faith that she will. And Marcy and Sasha have returned to her. So why not the planters? And in that sense, and in that the vibe of that feeling, I too believe that one day I will be reunited with this show and this crew. That's all. But I'm so grateful, and it was such a marvelous opportunity to tell this story and share it with you. Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for watching.